Hey there and welcome back. If the day has finally let go of you, if the work of it is behind you now and the light beside you is turned down low, then you have come to the right place to spend the next few hours. This is one of the gentle ones, an evening made for letting the years fall away and the room you are in grow soft and far. It is for anyone who has ever wished to be somewhere older and simpler than the world they woke in this morning, somewhere with one fire in it, and the people they love drawn close around that fire, and the striving age shut out beyond the wall. I would like to carry you to a place like that tonight, a long way north and a good way back, up into a fold of the western Highlands of Scotland in the autumn of 1795, into the kitchen of a farming family on the night they do what the law forbids and the glen pretends not to see. You need do nothing at all to come with me. You have only to let your breath go long and easy, and let the house build itself around you out of the dark as I speak it. There is a copper vessel at the gable end of that kitchen, and a fire being kept low and even beneath it, and before this night is over, a sound will come down off the black hill that makes the man of the house reach over and turn the lamp down to almost nothing, and hold his breath, and listen. Before we lift the latch and step in out of the cold, let me say one or two unhurried things to you the way you might pass a word at a door not your own. I always like to know where in the world you are listening from tonight, and what the hour has come to where you are, whether the dark is well down with you already, or only beginning to gather at the edges of the dusk. And if you would tell me in the comments, I do read them, and there is a quiet good company in the knowing that so many of us, scattered as we are across so many places and so many hours of the one night, are drawing in toward the same warmth together. And if these long evenings inside lives that are gone now are something you would be glad to find your way back to, you are welcome to subscribe, and the next of them will come to you of its own accord when it is ready, with nothing owed and no hurry in any of it. That is the whole of what I will ask. Only a door left off the latch, and a place kept for you nearer the fire than a stranger could rightly expect. Picture this. It is the close of a short autumn day high in a glen in the west of the Highlands, in that country where the last walled field gives out, and the open hill begins and runs on, ridge behind ridge, into the heart of the mountains. The harvest is in. For 3 weeks the township has been bent double in the little fields by the burn, cutting the beer and the oats with the hoke, binding and stooking and carting, and now the last of the grain is home and stacked, and a great tiredness and a greater relief lie over the place like the blue of the dusk itself. The light has been failing since the middle of the afternoon, for the sun does not climb far at this season, and slips early behind the southern shoulder of the glen, and the gold of it is nearly gone now from the high tops, and the cold is coming up out of the ground the way it does on the clear evenings of the back end of the year. There is no snow in this, none yet. The air is mild and damp, and smells of cut straw and turf smoke, and the wet green of the hill, and a few 100 feet below, strung along the green flat by the water, a dozen low houses sit close together with their backs to the weather, and the blue threads of their fires rising straight and untroubled into the still evening, and we are going down into the heart of them now, to one house in particular, where a family is gathering in for the night, and a fire has been laid for more than the cooking of the supper. Come down the track toward the dwellings with me then, while there is still a little light to see them by. The path drops off the shoulder of the hill in easy turns, worn smooth by the daily feet of 100 years of the same families, and it brings you in among the dwellings from the upper end, past the head dike that divides the farmed ground from the open hill, into the only piece of all that vast country that the people here have shaped to their own purpose. This is a byre, a farm town, a little clustered settlement of perhaps a dozen dwellings set down together with no plan to them at all, gable to gable and end to end. The byres running off the dwellings and the barns and the kilns and the stackyards filling the spaces between. so that the eye cannot easily tell where one family's holding stops and the next begins. It is nothing like the trim-ordered villages of the south. It has grown rather than been built, house added to house as sons married and stayed, and it sits in the lap of its own fields like something that the ground itself put up. Around it, on the better land along the burn, lie the strips of the run rig, the narrow rigs of ploughland shared out among the families and worked in common, ridged high against the wet, bare now and brown with the harvest off them. Beyond the rigs is the rough grazing, and beyond that the head dyke, and beyond that the hill, which belongs to no one and to all of them, and which runs up and away into the dusk without another mark of man on it, for as far as the failing light will carry the eye. The people who live here hold none of it in their own right. The land is the chief's or the chief's tacksmen's, and they are tenants on it, paying for the use of it in the old mingled way, partly in silver and partly in labour, and partly in the produce of their own hands, and the paying of that rent, as you will see before the night is out, is the quiet engine that drives everything that is about to happen in the home we are going to. What strikes you first, coming in among them at this hour, is how close together everything lives. A glen like this is a place of enormous loneliness, of empty hill and empty sky and miles of nothing, and the answer the people have made to all that emptiness is to crowd in upon one another, to set their houses wall to wall, and live their lives in one another's pockets, so that the loneliness of the country is held at bay by the nearness of the neighbours. Every soul in the township knows every other soul, and has known them since before either could walk, and is very likely cousin to half of them, and married into the other half. The children run between the houses as if all the houses were one house. The women work in and out of each other's kitchens. The men cut their peats and build their dykes and drive their cattle to the high grazing together, as their fathers did, and the small disputes that arise, and disputes always arise where people live this close, are settled among themselves by the older men, because everyone understands that they will have to go on living, tomorrow and the year after, and all their lives, with the very people the quarrel touched. The closeness is not always comfortable. There is no privacy in it, no corner of a life that the township does not know about, but it is what makes the place survivable, and it is what holds just now the particular secret that several of these chimneys are quietly keeping. For the smoke going up so straight and innocent into the evening air is not all of it the smoke of suppers. Behind more than one of these gables, when the dark comes fully down, a different fire will be tended through the small hours, and the township knows it, and the township says nothing, because the township is in it together. The house we want is near the lower end, a little apart, its gable turned to the prevailing wind and its door looking down the glen toward the water. It is a long, low building of unmortared stone. The stones gathered off the hill and the fields and fitted together by eye, the walls thick as a man's arm is long and packed in their hearts with earth and rubble to keep the weather out, and the building crouched down close to the ground as if it were trying not to be noticed by the sky. The roof is a steep pitch of turf and thatch, the thatch of heather and rushes, and the straw of last year's oats, roped down over the thatch with heather ropes, and weighted at the eaves with stones against the wind that can come down this glen in the winter like a living creature with a grudge. There is one low door in the longer side, and beside it one small window hardly more than a slit, with a wooden shutter to it rather than glass. For glass is dear, and the wind is strong, and a window is as much an enemy here as a friend. At the far end, under the same roof and behind the same wall, is the byre where the cattle stand, so that beast and family live the winter through beneath one thatch, sharing one another's warmth, and the smell of the one is never wholly out of the rooms of the other. It is not a poor dwelling by the reckoning of the glen. The family that holds it are tenants of standing, with a good stock of cattle and a name that goes back. But it is a house from an older world than the one you and I left behind this evening. A house with the smoke in its rafters and the earth under its floor and the long memory of a people in its very stones. And it is waiting for us now, with its door off the latch and its fire lit, at the lower end of a township at the edge of the inhabited world. Lift the latch, then, and push the door and step in over the threshold out of the cool blue dusk into another country altogether. The first of it is the warmth, coming up to meet you like a hand laid against the face, and with the warmth the light, the low amber light of a peat fire and a single small lamp, and with the light a great breath of scent, this place gathered into one lungful, peat reek and the sweetness of barley, and the steam of a pot, and the byre beyond the wall, and the dense old reek of the smoke that has soaked into the thatch and the timbers over 100 winters. Let the door fall to behind you against the night. Stand a moment and let your eyes come in out of the dusk and find their feet in the dimness, and let me show you where you have come to. This is the kitchen, the heart and very nearly the entire dwelling, the one room where the family's waking life is lived from the year's beginning to its end. The floor is of beaten earth, swept hard and clean and as level as a floor of earth can be made. The walls within are the bare stone, dark with the smoke of years, hung here and there with the gear of the house and the work, a creel, a coil of heather rope, the long-handled peat spade, a fishing line, a few iron tools. And at the gable end, on a wide raised hearth of flat stone set in the middle of the floor rather than against the wall, the fire is burning, the peats glowing red and grey and breathing out their sweet heat, with an iron chain hung down from the smoke-blackened roof on which the pot and the kettle swing, and no chimney above it to speak of, only a hole in the thatch where the worst of the smoke finds its way out, and the rest hangs in a soft blue haze among the rafters and seasons, the hams and the fish that hang up there to cure. It is into this room, and around this fire that the night is gathered. Before we look at the people in it, hold in your mind for a moment the labour that has just ended, for it is the reason this particular evening falls when it does, and carries the weight it carries. The harvest is the hinge of the whole year in a place like this, the few weeks on which everything else turns, and it has only just been got safely in. Through the back end of August and on into September the township gave itself over to nothing else. Every hand that could hold a hook was out in the rigs from the first grey of the morning, the men and the women and the half-grown children, working down the ridges of berry and oats with the short, curved sickle that has cut the grain of this country for 1,000 years, the cutter gathering the stalks in the crook of one arm, and shearing them with the other, low to the ground, to save every inch of the precious straw. Behind the cutters came the binders, twisting a band of the corn itself and tying the cut handfuls into sheaves, and behind the binders the children, gleaning what fell, for nothing was let go to waste in a country where a bad harvest meant a hungry spring. The sheaves were set up in stooks to dry, leaning together in their little tented rows down the rigs, and when the weather held they were carted home to the stackyard and built into the round thatched stacks that are the true wealth of the place, the granary on which the family will draw all the long winter through. It was anxious work as much as it was hard, for the weather in these hills can turn the labour of a season to rot in 3 wet days, and a man stands in his field, watching the clouds come over the western tops, with his heart in his mouth. This year the weather was kind enough, the rain held off in the worst of it, and the grain came home dry and sound, and that, more than anything, is the source of the deep ease that lies over the township tonight. For with the grain in, the year's great fear is lifted. The people of this glen live always within sight of want, never more than one failed harvest from real hunger, and the gathering of the corn is the moment each year when that fear lets go its grip for a season. There is a custom in it too that tells you how much the moment means to them. The very last of the standing corn, the final handful left uncut in the last rig, is not cut like the rest, but is plated and dressed and carried home in honour. The maiden, they call her, or the ceilidh, the old wife, depending on whether the harvest came in early or late, and she is hung up in the house over the hearth and kept there till the spring, a charm and a thanksgiving and a small green memory of the dead season carried alive through the dark of the year. Somewhere in the rafters of the home we have just entered, that plated sheaf is hanging now, brought in 3 days since with the last cartload, and it presides over everything that the room will do tonight. The work has earned the family this pause, this gathered evening, this fire lit for more than supper. But the same harvest that feeds them has also given them the very matter. The evening is really about, for the bearer that came home in those stacks is not all of it destined for the meal journal and the porridge pot. A good part of the barley of this country never feeds a soul as bread. It is turned instead into something else, something that does not rot, that packs small, that can be carried far and sold dear, and that is, for a family with a rent to find in hard silver, very nearly the only way the brown grain of a Highland rig can be made to yield the coin that the age below now demands of them. That turning is the work of the still, and it is the work this house has set itself to do tonight, while the harvest ease is on it, and the nights are long enough to give the labour cover. Now let me show you the family who hold this house, for they are the heart of everything that follows. The night belongs to them, and not to me. The man of the house is called Ian. He is somewhere in his late 30s, though the weather of the hill has aged his face beyond his years, and he is a careful man, not given to talk, with the slow considering manner of someone who has learned that most of his life cannot be hurried, and the few that can are seldom worth the hurrying. He sits just now on a low stool by the fire with his elbows on his knees, watching the peats, turning something over in his mind, and what he is turning over is the hours ahead and the risk in it, for he knows to the last detail what he stands to lose if the night goes wrong, and he has decided, as he decides it every autumn, that the risk is worth the running. His wife is More, and if Ian is the head of this house, then More is the hands of it, a woman a year or two younger than her man, quick where he is slow, sharp-eyed, never still, with a competence about her that fills the room. It is worth your knowing now, against everything you might expect, that the craft the household will practice tonight is at least as much hers as his, for in this country the making of the spirit was women's work as deeply as it was men's, the malting and the mashing and the reading of the run as much in the wife's keeping as the husband's. And when the difficult moment comes in the small hours, it is More, not Usen, whose judgment the house will trust. In the warm corner nearest the fire, in the place of honour that the oldest is always given, sits Ian's father, old Domhnall, and he is the longest thread in this house, for he was born in this very glen in the year 1720, which makes him an old man indeed, and his memory reaches back into a Scotland that has very nearly gone. He says little. He sits with his hands folded on the head of his stick and his eyes half closed, seeming to doze, but he misses nothing that happens in the room, and now and then through the evening he will say a few words, in the slow Gaelic that is the first and truest tongue of this home, that carry the weight of all the years he has seen. He remembers, as you will hear, the last rising and the marching out, and the long walk home from the moor where it all ended, and he has watched, in the 50 years since, the slow changing of his country into something he no longer wholly knows, and he can feel, in the way that very old men come to feel such matters, that the changing is not done, that more is coming, and that the age his grandchildren are growing into will not be the world he was born to. The children themselves are 3. The eldest is a boy of 12, also Ian, young Ian, old enough tonight to be let for the first time into the men's part of the work, proud and a little frightened, and trying to show neither. There is a girl of 9 who helps her mother, and a bairn not yet 2 who sleeps already in the box bed against the wall and will sleep through everything the night brings. That is the house. A careful man, a capable woman, a very old father, 3 children, and a fire lit for a purpose, gathered into one warm room while the dark comes down outside and the work of the night waits to begin. Take a moment to see them as they are, by the low light of the fire and the one small lamp, for they are dressed in a fashion already passing from the country, and worth your noticing. The men wear the belted plaid, the great length of woven woolen cloth, checked in the soft colours that the local plants and lichens give to the wool, that is wrapped about the body and belted at the waist and thrown up over the shoulder, the lower part falling like a kilt, and the upper serving as a cloak by day and a blanket by night, a single garment that is house and coat and bed cover all at once to a man on the hill. It is a practical dress for a wet and a cold country, leaving the legs free for climbing and fording and quick to dry, and it has clothed the men of these glens past the reach of memory, though the law tried for a time to forbid it after the rising, and only lately let it be worn again. The women wear the long gown of the same homespun, and over it the arised, the woman's plaid, a lighter wrapper pinned at the breast and falling to the heels, and the married women cover their hair in the close linen cap that marks the wife, while the girls go bareheaded with their hair loose or braided. The cloth of all of it was grown and spun and dyed and woven within a few miles of where they sit, the wool off their own sheep, the colours off their own hills, the weaving done at the local loom, so that they are clothed, like everything else about them, very nearly out of the ground they stand on. They go barefoot much of the year, the children always, the grown people often, keeping their few precious shoes for the kirk and the worst of the winter, and their feet are hard as horn from a life on the heather and the stone. They are not a ragged people, for all the poverty of the place. They are clean and decently covered, and carry themselves with the quiet dignity of folk who answer to no master in the daily round of their lives, and to see them gathered in the firelight, the bright soft checks of the wool and the women's white caps glowing in the dimness, is to see a picture out of an older Scotland that the coming century will sweep almost entirely away. The supper comes first, before any of the night's other business, for a working family eats when the light goes whatever else is in hand, and the meal of a harvest evening is a fuller and a gladder board than it will see again until the spring. More has had the pot swinging on its chain by the fire since the middle of the afternoon, and the broth in it is thick and brown and serious, barley from the new crop, and kale from the yard by the door, and the good marrow of a bone, a meal in itself eaten from wooden bowls with horn spoons. The family drawn in around the hearth on their stools with the bowls on their knees. There is no table to speak of, or rather the table is a plain board that is brought out and set up when it is wanted, and stood against the wall when it is not, and tonight, with the harvest in, it is brought out. The foundation of everything on it is the oatmeal and the bare meal, the ground grain that is the bread and the strength of the country, and it appears in a dozen guises across an ordinary day, the morning porridge stirred thick and eaten with milk, the brose that is quicker still and is a working man's standby, the bannocks baked hard on the flat iron girdle over the fire and stacked to keep. But this is no ordinary night, and so there is more. There is a cheese, a kebbuck of the hard cheese Moore makes from the milk of the house cow, and there is butter from the same source salted down in a crock, and there is milk in its several forms, sweet and skimmed and soured, for the cow is here, as the cow is everywhere in this country, the quiet wealth that turns plain meal into a living diet. And because the killing time is near, and a beast has lately been taken, there is meat, more than a poorer board would show, mutton in the broth, and a piece of it on the board, and the smell of it fills the room, and makes the children's eyes go to it. They eat well, and they eat with the unhurried satisfaction of people who have earned their food with the full strength of their bodies and know its worth to the last mouthful. Before a spoon is lifted, Ian says the grace, a few quiet words in Gaelic with his head bowed and the family still around him, thanking the god of the harvest for the grain-safe home and the food on the board and the roof over them, for these are devout people in the plain unshowy way of the country, and the giving of thanks for the meal is as fixed and as natural to them as the eating of it. The vessels they eat from tell the same tale of a place that makes its own. Bowls and spoons turned from birch and bog fir by a neighbour's knife, a few horn cups worn smooth by generations of lips, a single bowl of glazed earthenware bought once at a market and kept for show on the shelf above the meal journal. There is no silver on this board and no fine ware, and none is wanted. The firelight finds the faces around the hearth, the children watchful and mannerly waiting to be served in their turn, the old man given the first and best of everything by an unspoken rule no one in the house would dream of breaking. There is talk over the food, low and easy, the talk of a family at the end of a good day, of the last of the carting and the state of the stacks and a beast that is to be sold and a neighbour's daughter who is to be married, and old Domhnall is coaxed into a story of a harvest long ago that was nearly lost to a week of rain, and the children listen with their bowls forgotten. There is tea too, a novelty even here, kept in a little caddy and brewed strong and sweet and rare and valued for the luxury it is. And when the bowls are scraped and the board is cleared and the few dishes are washed and set up to drain, the supper is done, and a kind of settling comes over the room, the settling of a house that has fed itself and banked its strength and is turning now to face the hours ahead. The younger children are got ready for their bed. The fire is built up a little, and the grown people, and young Ian among them now for the first time, draw their stools a touch closer to the hearth, for the part of the evening that the meal was only the doorway to is about to begin. It is worth your knowing, while the smell of the good supper still hangs in the room, what lies behind a board so full, for the autumn is the one season of plenty in a year that holds long stretches of want, and the family is even now laying in the provision that must carry it through the dark months to the far-off spring. The harvest is the grain of it, the meal stored in the great wooden journal against the wall, oatmeal and byre meal enough in a fair year to give the porridge and the bannocks of every day, until the new crop comes, and it is watched and measured through the winter with a careful eye, for to run short of meal before the spring is the oldest fear of the country, and a real one in a thin year. But the meal is not all of it. This is the killing time, the weeks when the beasts that cannot be wintered are slaughtered, and the meat preserved, salted down in barrels or hung in the peat smoke of the rafters to cure, and the family that has lately taken a beast has its winter meat laid by a luxury that will be eked out sparingly, a little at a time, through the cold to come. There is the cheese, the hard kebbucks made through the summer at the shieling and stored to ripen. There is the butter, salted in its crock. There is the fish, where a family can get it, the salmon from the river or the herring brought up from the coast, salted or smoked and kept. There are the few hardy roots and the kale that stands green in the yard through the frost. And there is the drink, the ale brewed from the byre and the spirit kept back from the still against the evenings and the feast days of the dark season. All of it is gathered in now, in these few rich autumn weeks, the larder filled and the stackyard built and the peats stacked high, the household labouring at the one great task of the year, which is to rest from the brief generous autumn enough to outlast the ungenerous winter, and the fullness of tonight's board is the first fruit and the visible sign of that gathering in, a plenty made sweeter by the lean memory of last spring, and the lean certainty of the spring to come. While the house settles, let me take you the few steps to the far end of it, behind the wall at Iron's back, into the byre, for the cattle housed there are not a detail of this place, but very nearly the point of it entire, and you cannot understand the family's reckoning of money and rent and risk without first understanding the beasts. Push through the low rough door in the cross wall, and you are in another air at once, warmer even than the kitchen and thick with the breath and the bodies of the animals, the smell of them and their dung and the hay and the byre floor all together in the dark. For there is no lamp here, only what little firelight follows you through the door. There are 6 of them tied in their stalls along the wall, the small black cattle of the Highlands, shaggy and short and hardy, with the wide horns and the long fringe of hair over the eyes, beasts bred not for the size of them, but for their power to live through a Highland winter on next to nothing and to walk at the end of it, the long road to the markets of the south on their own 4 feet. They stand close in the dark, chewing, shifting their weight, turning their heads as you come among them, and the heat that comes off their bodies is a real and a valued warmth, for it rises through the cross wall and into the kitchen, and helps to warm the family through the bitter months. The oldest bargain of this kind of house, that the beasts shall have a roof, and the people shall have the warmth of them. These 6 animals are the family's true bank, the store of all their labour, all that stands between them and ruin. A Highland family of this sort lives very largely without money from one year's end to the next, growing its own meal and its own kale, spinning its own wool, cutting its own fuel, needing silver for almost nothing in the daily round. But silver they must have, all the same, once a year, in a hard lump, for the rent, and the cattle are how they get it. Each autumn the surplus of the beasts, the young stock that the winter's fodder will not stretch to keep, is sold away south, and the price of them is the cash on which the arrangement of the family's life depends. There is one other beast in the house worth a word, and it is not in the byre but by the fire, the dog that lies now with its nose on its paws at Iron's feet, and that gave a while back the first warning of the footsteps on the hill. The dog is no pet, though it is loved well enough, but a worker, one of the lean, rough collies bred in the glen for the herding of the cattle, quick and clever, and bound to its master by a working partnership as old as the keeping of beasts, able to gather and turn and hold a herd on the open hill at a word or a whistle, and worth, to a man who must move cattle over country, no fence could hold, very nearly its weight in silver. By night it is the ears of the house, lying by the fire with one part of it always listening, and on a running night that watchfulness is a help the family leans on, for the dog will hear and name with its body the approach of any stranger long before a human ear could catch it. The stiffening and the low growl that warned them tonight worth more than any lookout. It asks little, a share of the scraps and a place by the fire, and it gives much, its work on the hill and its watch in the dark and the plain animal companionship of it, and it is as much a part of the household as any of them, woven into the life of the place in the quiet way of a creature that has shared the work and the fire of a family for the length of its life. In a week or 2 the drovers will come through the glen gathering the cattle of the township for the walk to the trysts of the south, and the beasts in this byre that are marked for sale will go with them, down out of the hills they were reared in, to be turned at the end into the coin that pays the chief his rent. That is the ordinary way of it, the way it has always been. But the price of cattle is a chancy business, rising and falling with markets the people here never see and cannot understand, and the rent does not rise and fall with it, but stands fixed and due whatever the beasts fetch, and in a year when the price is poor, a family can find that the cattle alone will not cover what is owed. It is in exactly that gap between what the beasts will bring and what the rent demands that the work of tonight has its reason. For the spirit that the still will make is the family's other crop, the one they can sell for silver as surely as the beasts, and on a year when the cattle fall short, it is the spirit that makes up the difference and keeps the roof over their heads. Let me put that reason to you plainly then, before we light the fire under the copper, for it matters to everything, and it is easily misunderstood. The making of whiskey in a glen like this was not, to the people who made it, a romance or a craft pursued for love, whatever it has since become to those who buy the bottle in the world below. It was, first and last and almost entirely, a way of paying the rent. Consider the bind a family is in. They grow grain, good barley, more of it in a fair year than they can eat. They owe a rent, and the rent, which their grandfathers might have paid in cattle or in service or in kind, is wanted now in money, hard coin, for the landlords of the age have learned to want money, and the old payments will no longer do. But a glen at the head of a Highland sea loch is a long way from any market, and to carry a few bowls of barley over the hill tracks to sell would cost more in labour and in beasts than the grain would ever fetch. The barley is bulky, and it is cheap, and it will spoil. The problem, in short, is how to turn a heavy, cheap, perishable crop that the family has plenty of into a light, dear, lasting good that a buyer far away will pay silver for. And the answer, the only answer the country ever found, is to distill it. A boll of barley that is worth almost nothing where it is grown becomes run through the still, a few gallons of spirit worth many times the grain, small enough to be carried out on the back of a single garran pony over the roughest path, lasting enough to keep for months, wanted enough that there is always a buyer. The illogical economy of the place turns on that one transformation. It is why nearly every house in the township keeps a still. It is why the chimneys smoke late. And it is why this careful, devout, law-abiding family is about to spend the night breaking the law of the land, because the law of the land has put a tax on the only means that lets them pay the rent the same law's friends collect. And the work of the still did not begin tonight, and you should understand what has gone before it. The patient days of preparation that have led up to this single working night. For the running of the spirit is only the last act of a labour that has been going on quietly in the corners of this home for the better part of a fortnight. It began with the barley, a portion of the new byre set aside from the meal grain for this purpose, and the first work done to it was to wake it. The grain was steeped, soaked in water in a tub for 2 or 3 days, until it was swollen and soft and beginning to think of growing, and then it was lifted out and spread on the floor of an outhouse in a thick damp bed and left to germinate, to sprout, each grain pushing out the pale thread of a root and beginning to turn the hard starch of its heart into the sweet stuff a young plant feeds on. For several days Moore tended that bed of waking grain like a sick bed, turning it with a wooden shovel morning and evening to keep it from heating and matting, watching it, smelling it, knowing by long practice the exact moment to stop it, for the grain must be caught just as the sprouting has gone far enough, and not a day beyond. When that moment came, the green malt, as it is now called, was carried to the kiln and spread on a haircloth over a fire to be dried, and the fire under it was a peat fire, and the smoke of the peat rose up through the drying grain, and laid into it the faint dark sweetness that the spirit will carry to the end of its days. That smoke is the taste of the place itself, the taste of the bog and the hill, and it goes into the whiskey here not by any choice or art, but simply because peat is the only fuel the glen has, and the smoke of it is in everything the people make and eat and are. The dried malt was ground, then, coarsely, between the stones of the household quern or at the mill down the glen, and that brings the work to within a day or two of tonight. But the next step is the one that has filled the back of the house with its smell since yesterday. The ground malt was mashed, mixed with hot water in the big tub, not boiling but hot, and stirred and left to stand. and in that warm bath the sweetness locked in the grain came loose and passed into the water, so that what was drawn off the bottom of the tub at the end was no longer water, but a thick brown sugary liquid, the wort sweet as weak honey to the tongue, and the wort run off into the working tubs that stand now along the cool back wall of the house, was set to ferment, sprinkled with the balm, the yeast saved from the last brewing, and left to do the work it is doing at this moment as we speak, which is to turn its sweetness into strength. Go and stand by those tubs for a minute in the dimness, and you will hear it, a low busy whisper and tick and seething, the sound of the yeast at its work, and you will smell it, a smell gone sharp and yeasty, and faintly sour now where 2 days ago it was all sweetness. And if you laid a hand on the side of the tub, you would feel it faintly warm, for the labour throws off its own heat. This is the wash, and it is finished, or near enough, a thin, sour, rough sort of ale, undrinkable and full of the strength that the still will draw out of it tonight. Everything until now has been preparation. The waking of the grain, the drying, the grinding, the mashing, the patient days of the ferment, all of it has been building toward this. The having of a few tubs of strong sour wash ready on the evening, the family judges safe to run it. That night is tonight. And so the supper cleared, and the small ones bedded, and the wash at its peak, A.N. gets up at last from his stool by the kitchen fire, and goes to the gable end to light the other fire, the one this evening has been waiting for. The still stands in a kind of lean-to scullery built against the gable, a low dark cell of a place with its own small hearth, half in the house and half out of it, close enough to the kitchen for the warmth and the watching, and far enough that the worst of the smell and the steam are kept from the living room. It is a modest apparatus, the still, nothing grand, a squat, round-bellied vessel of beaten copper, with a long tapering head curving over and away from it into a coiled pipe, and beside it the cooling tub, and that is very nearly all. The copper is old and dark and dented and lovingly mended, for a still is a costly possession to a family of this rank, bought at who knows what sacrifice or handed down or got second hand, and it is cared for like the treasure it is. A.N. rakes out the small hearth beneath it, and lays the fire with a careful hand, dry peats and a few precious sticks to start them, and sets a light to it, and crouches there in the near dark feeding the young flames and coaxing them, for the fire under a still is the most delicate part in all the business, and the one that will need the most watching through the night. It must be hot enough to do the work and never so hot as to spoil it, even and steady and patient hour upon hour, and the managing of it is half the craft. Young Gain has come through to watch, hanging back in the doorway between the kitchen and the still house, and his father, without turning round, tells him to come in and close the door behind him, and the boy does, and so the work is begun. And the boy is in it now, part of the secret, one of the people of this house who do the forbidden work and keep the silence about it. The fire catches and steadies. The copper begins, very slowly, to take the heat, but it is not Singain who will run the still, not in the deep part of the business, and you should see now how the labour falls in this house, for it is not as a stranger from the south would guess. A.N. has lit the fire, and he will tend it, and he is master here, but the spirit itself, the drawing of it, and the judging of it, is More's affair, and has been since before they married, for she learned it from her own mother as the girls of this country learned it, at the side of the still in the autumn nights, and her hands know the craft better than her husband's do. She comes through from the kitchen now, with her sleeves turned back, and she goes over the apparatus with the quick, sure attention of someone checking a piece she has checked 100 times, the joints of the head where it meets the body, the lute of paste that seals them, the run of the pipe down into the cooling tub, the level of the cold water in the tub itself. Then she and Iane together lift and pour, charging the body of the still with the wash from the working tubs, the sour brown liquid going in with a deep glugging note until the vessel is filled to the right mark and no further, for an overfilled still will boil over and ruin everything. The head is set on and sealed down with a fresh rope of the soft paste, worked into the joint with the fingers, for not a wisp of the precious vapour must be let escape. And then there is nothing to do but wait and watch the fire and let the heat climb slowly up through the copper into the wash, and More settles herself on a stool beside the still with the unhurried patience of long habit, and lays a hand now and then against the swelling belly of the vessel to feel the warmth of it climbing, and listens, and waits for the first sign that the still is coming to life. While the copper heats, step out with me for a moment into the night to see the other half of the apparatus, the part that does its work in the cold, for a still is a creature of two temperatures, fire at one end and ice water at the other, and the meeting of the two is where the spirit is born. The coiled pipe that leads off the head of the still, the worm, as it is rightly called for the way it twists, runs out through the wall of the lean-to and down into a large open tub set just outside, and that tub is kept filled with the coldest water the place can give, led in by a little wooden trough from the burn that comes down off the hill a few steps away. Go out to it now, out of the heat and the peat reek into the raw damp air of the autumn night, and you feel at once how the cold of the country presses in the moment you leave the fire. The burn talks away in the dark below, swollen a little with the recent rain, running fast and black and bitterly cold off the high ground, and the trough takes a part of it and brings it chuckling into the tub, and the overflow runs away again into the night, so that the water in the tub is always moving, always renewed, always fresh. The success of the run depends on this homely arrangement working as it should, for the vapour that will come boiling off the heated wash must be turned back into liquid before it can be caught, and it is the cold of this water, wrapped around the coil of the worm, that turns it. Hot vapour goes into the top of the coil from the still head, wins its way down through the chill, and comes out at the bottom no longer vapour, but spirit running clear. Someone must watch the tub through the night as surely as someone must watch the fire, drawing off the water as it warms and letting in the icy water from the burn, for if the worm grows too warm, the vapour will not turn, and the precious stuff will be lost to the air. And so this chill corner by the running water is a station of the night's work as much as the warm one by the fire. It is young Yane who is given the worm tub to mind, his first real charge in the work, and he stands out there in the dark with a pail, solemn with the weight of the trust, dipping the warming water off the top of the tub, and tipping in the cold from the trough, glancing every little while at the mouth of the worm where nothing yet comes. And then, after a long while of nothing, with the fire steady and the copper hot and the wash within it, brought at last to the boil, the still comes to life. The first sign of it is a change in the sound, a deeper note from within the vessel and a faint singing in the head, and then, at the lip of the worm where the boy stands watching, the first thin clear thread of liquid gathers and falls, and another, until it is running in a slow steady trickle into the vessel set to catch it. The boy calls in through the wall that it is running, his voice gone high with the excitement of it, and inside More answers that she hears him, and to keep the water cold, and the work proper has begun. What is coming over now, at the first, is not yet the whisky, and More knows it, and so must you. The first flow of a still, the 4 shots, is rank and sharp and not to be drunk, full of the volatile rawness that comes off first, and it is set aside. What comes after it, the middle of the run, is the heart of the matter, the good clean spirit, and the catching of it begins when More, testing the stuff as it runs by its smell and its feel, and the look of it beading on her finger, judges that the 4 shots are past, and the true spirit has begun to flow. Until then, the family does the patient, unglamorous tasks that fill a working night. The boy at his tub, Ein at his fire, feeding it peat by peat to hold it even, more on her stool with her attention bent on the slow, clear thread falling from the worm, and the rest of the dwelling quiet around them, the small ones asleep, the old man dozing by the kitchen fire, the dark settling into its long middle watch. It is into that settled working quiet, an hour or so into the run, that the dog lifts its head, and then there comes a knock at the door. A knock at this hour, on this evening of all nights, sends a cold finger down the back of every grown person in the house, and Ian is on his feet at once, and Moore's hand is still on the worm, and for a moment nobody moves. But the dog is not barking the deep warning bark it keeps for strangers, only thumping its tail and whining a little at the door, and that tells its own story before ever the latch is lifted. And sure enough, when Ian opens the door, it is no gauger standing there in the dark, but a face the house knows well, a big weathered grinning man with a plaid, soaked dark with the night's damp, and a long staff in his hand, and the smell of the road and the cattle on him, and the room lets out its held breath at once. It is the drover come up the glen ahead of the gathering, and he is as welcome a sight as the house could wish, and he is pulled in out of the night, and the door shut behind him, and a stool found for him by the kitchen fire, and a bowl of the broth set warming for him. For the hospitality of these lonely homes to a known traveller is open-handed, past anything the crowded South would understand, and a drover most of all is a man to be made welcome, for he is the bridge between the glen and everything that lies beyond it. He is a particular kind of man, the drover, and worth your knowing, for he is among the most travelled and the most trusted men of his society, and his coming changes the temper of the room. He is the man who, in a week or two, will take the cattle of this township and a dozen others on the long road south to the great autumn markets, and to be entrusted with another man's beasts on that journey, worth more than the man may see in money in a year. A drover must be honest, beyond question, and skilled beyond doubt, and such men are known the length of the country, and carry a standing that sits oddly with their rough and weathered look. This one has done the road every autumn of his grown life. He knows every mile of it, the fords and the stances and the inns by heart, and he knows the markets at the end of it, and the prices and the dealers, and he knows, what is more, the news of the wider world, for he hears it in the inns along the way, and carries it back into the glens with the empty droving season, the only newspaper these far houses have. He has come up tonight, he says, settling himself by the fire with the bowl in his hands, to talk with Ian and the other men about the gathering, which beasts are to go and how they are to be marked and met, and to take a bed by the fire for the night before he goes on up the glen in the morning. But he has brought more than the business of the cattle with him. He has brought the news, and some of the news, as the family will hear before the evening is much older, touches very nearly on the work that is going on quietly at the gable end of the very room he is sitting in. First, though, let the talk run where it wants to run, which is to the road, for once a drover is warm and fed, there is no keeping him off the subject of the droving, and it is worth your hearing, for that long road south is the one thread that ties this hidden glen to the great world of markets and money it can otherwise scarcely imagine. In a week or two, he tells them, when the gathering is made, he will take the beasts of the township down out of the hills, joining them as he goes with the cattle of other glens, until he has a great shifting herd of many hundreds moving south under his charge and the charge of the lads who help him. They will not go by any made road, for there are few enough made ways in this country, and the hard surface would ruin the soft feet of the cattle in a day. They will go instead by the drove roads, which are nothing built at all but old green corridors of custom, ribbons of grazing ground running south over the passes and along the valleys, used for this one purpose by the same families for longer than anyone can remember, with regular halting places, the stances where the herd can be rested and watered overnight, and the drovers can sleep wrapped in their plaids among the beasts. They will move at a walk, 10 or a dozen miles in a day, no more, for a beast driven hard loses the very flesh it is being taken to market to sell, and the art of the drover is to bring his charges to the tryst after weeks on the road still in good heart and good condition. And the tryst is the end of it, the great autumn market at Crieff or at Falkirk, away in the south, where the drovers of all the Highlands converge with their herds and the dealers come up from England to buy, and where, in a few roaring days of bargaining, the cattle of 100 glens change hands, and the silver flows north into the hills to pay the rents of people who will never themselves see the place their beasts were sold. And here the drovers talk, and the work at the gable end come quietly together, for the spirit that more is drawing off drop by drop tonight will travel that same road, in those same weeks, by that same trusted hand. It is an open matter between them, spoken of without shame in this room, though it would never be spoken of beyond it, that the drover carries more south than cattle. The small casks of spirit that the houses of the township fill in these autumn nights go down with the droves, slung on a garron or hidden in the gear, carried by a man who knows every quiet way and every safe stance and every place where a question is unlikely to be asked, and sold in the markets for silver alongside the beasts. And the silver comes back up the glen the same way to do the same work the cattle money does. The drove is the still's road to market as much as the cattle's, and the drover is the merchant of both, and this is why his coming tonight, on a running night, is no awkwardness but the most natural matter in the glen. He has come, in part, to learn how much there will be for him to carry, and Ian tells him, and they fall, to talking of casks, and of prices, and of the man in the south, who will take the spirit, and young Ans, listening from the still house door, understands for the first time, watching the clear thread fall from the worm, that the stuff running there tonight is not made to be drunk in this house at all, but to be turned, like the cattle, into the coin that keeps the house standing, and that he is watching in this small dark room the making of the family's daily bread. It is the word whisky itself, falling into the talk, that draws old Domhnall up out of his doze in the warm corner, and once the old man begins to speak, the room gives way to him, for the longest memory in any house has the right to the floor, and what he has to say reaches back past anything the rest of them know. They call it the water of life, he says in the slow Gaelic of his generation, Uwisig Beatha, and that is not a fancy or a boast, but the oldest name there is for it, the very words turned later by the soft southern tongues into the single word the dealers use, the long phrase worn down by careless mouths until only the usage was left, the water, which is the whole of what the borrowed term for it now means. The making of it is more ancient than any man can say, older than the rising, beyond the union of the crowns, laid down before the first stone of the first kirk in the country was set. It came, he says, the way most learning came, through the houses of the monks in the old religion, the brothers who knew the secret of drawing the strong water off the weak, who had it from older lands still, away to the south and the east, where the craft was already old before ever it reached these shores. He remembers his own grandfather telling of a time when the spirit was a medicine more than a drink, a remedy the wise men and the physicians made and gave by the spoonful for the colic and the palsy and the cold in the bones, raw and fierce, and steeped with herbs and honey to make it bearable, nothing like the clear smooth stuff running from the worm tonight, which is a fruit of more recent skill. The water of life, he says again, half to himself, looking into the fire, and the name hangs in the smoky air of the room with all its weight of years, and for a moment The small dark kitchen at the head of a Highland Glen seems to open out backward into a great depth of time. The same fire and the same copper and the same patient hands going back and back through the generations to a beginning no one living can name. And once Domhnall has begun to remember, he goes on, drawn by the firelight and the late hour and the willing silence of the children at his feet into the deepest of his memories. The one the family knows is there, and seldom asks him to open. He was a young man, he says, 25 years old, in the year the prince came over the water, and he marched out from this very glen with the other men of the name when the call came, down out of these hills with a sword his father had kept hidden since the last time, into a great gathering of the clans, the like of which the country had not seen in living memory, and would never see again. He does not make a tale of glory of it. He has lived too long and seen too much for that. He tells it plainly, in the way the memory of his learnings have taught him to tell hard matters, the long marches and the cold and the hunger and the grand wild hope of it, and then the end of it, on a sleeting grey afternoon, on a moor away to the east in the spring of the year 46, where in less than an hour all of that hope was broken forever, and the men who had carried it were scattered and cut down. He walked home, he says. That is nearly all he will say of the end. He walked home over the hills by night, hiding by day, many weeks of it, into a glen and a country that the law was even then beginning to take apart, and he has lived all the decades since in the long shadow of that one afternoon, and watched, slowly, the breaking up of everything the rising had been fought to keep. And he is the only man left now in the township who marched. And when he is gone, the last living thread back to that day will go with him. The old man's hard remembering would weigh too heavy on the room if it were let to stand. And so, as the way is in such houses, it turns of its own accord into something lighter, for after the marching memory Domhnall does what he has always done with the young ones at his knee on a winter evening, which is to leave the true tales and pass into the old tales, and the children, who have heard the marching story put away and felt the shadow of it, lean in gladly now to the stories they love. These are the long inheritance of the glen, handed down the generations by the fireside in the dark half of the year, and they are the true literature of a people who set almost nothing down in writing, kept alive entirely in the memory and the mouth. He tells them of the ceilidh, the old woman of the hills, the blue-faced hag of winter, who herds the deer and brings the snow and strikes the ground hard with her staff. He tells them of the each-wished, the water-horse that lives in the black loch up the glen and comes ashore in the shape of a fine pony to tempt the unwary onto its back and carry them down into the deep, and the children shiver with the pleasure of being frightened in the warm. He tells them of the second sight, the gift and the curse of seeing what is to come, of men who saw a shroud rise about a neighbour who was hale, and of lights seen moving where a funeral would later pass. And the room is very still while he tells it. For these are not idle tales to the people here, but the furniture of a world they more than half believe in, a place in which the hills are not empty but full of presence, and the unseen presses close against the seen, and a wise person walks carefully and keeps the old observances and does not mock what cannot be explained. And all of it comes to them in the Gaelic, which is the breath and the soul of this house, the only tongue the old man has and the first tongue of them all, the language the stories were made in and can scarcely be told out of. It is a tongue rich beyond the reckoning of the south in the very stuff this life is made of, with words for the lights in the sky, and the turns of the weather, and the moods of the sea, and the kinds of bog and hill and water that the careful living of this country requires, a language grown up out of the place itself, and fitted to it as the heather is fitted to the moor. The songs are in it, the great wealth of the songs, the milking songs and the rowing songs and the walking songs the women sing over the cloth, The laments and the lullabies and the long heroic lays that a good reciter can carry for an hour together, and the proverbs are in it, the packed wisdom of the generations, and the blessings, the small holy words said over the kindling of the fire in the morning and the smoring of it at night, and the milking of the cow and the going out and the coming in, so that the round of an ordinary day is threaded through with a quiet web of words half practical and half sacred. To sit in this kitchen tonight is to sit inside that language as inside a house, and it is worth your knowing, though no one in the room could know it, that this too is a way living on borrowed time, that the tongue so full and alive around this fire tonight will be pressed and thinned and driven back over the next 100 years until it clings on only at the far edges of the land, so that the children at the old man's knee are among the last to be wholly at home in it as their fathers were. But while the tales go on by the kitchen fire, the real work goes steadily on at the gable end. And now it reaches the moment that is the very point and the chief danger of the night, the moment that asks of more fearthing her long training has taught her, and you should come back through and watch it, for it is the heart of the craft. The still has run for a good while now. The foreshots are long past, set aside in their own vessel, and the good spirit, the heart of the run, has been flowing clear and clean into the catching jar this hour and more. But a still does not give good spirit forever. As the strength is drawn out of the wash, the stuff that comes over changes slowly at first and then faster, growing weaker and ranker and less wholesome. The tails, as they are called, the last running, which is no more fit to keep than the first was. And the art of it, the part that divides a fine maker from a poor one, is to know the exact moment when the sound heart is giving way to the tails, and to make the cut there, to stop catching the run into the keeping jar and turn it aside, neither too soon, which throws away clean spirit and wastes the labour, nor too late, which lets the rank stuff in and taints it all. There is no measure for it that a stranger could use, no gauge, no clock. It is done by the senses alone, by the nose above all. And Maud does it now, taking the running spirit on her finger, and to her lips and her nose, again and again, as the run goes on, her face bent to the work, reading the slow change in it that no one without her years of practice could catch, until at the moment she alone can judge, she says the word, and the catching jar is drawn away, and the vessel for the tails set under the worm in its place, and the cut is made, and the good spirit of the night is safe. It is a quiet moment for so much to hang on, no drama in it to see, only a woman's intent face, and a word spoken low, and a jar moved a foot to one side, but the worth of the night is in it. And when it is done and a good jar is carried carefully to the side and covered, there is a loosening in the still house, a few low words, the boy let to peer into the jar at the clear spirit that is the fruit of all the labour. And while that ease is on them, the drover, who has wandered through from the kitchen to watch the end of the run, lets fall the piece of his news that has been waiting all evening to be told, and the temper of the room changes again at a stroke. The gaugers, he says, are grown bold in the next glen but one. He had it from a man he trusts on his way up. There has been an officer of the excise quartered down at the change house this month past, a keen one, not the easy sort that can be managed, and he has been up the glens with a party more than once in the dark, and there have been seizures, 2 of them, stills carried off and smashed, and the makers brought before the justice, and fined in money they could not spare. One of them, a man with a family no better off than this one. The room takes it in silence. Everyone in it knows at once what it means. The work they are doing tonight, the work that pays the rent, the work the township does and has always done, has grown more dangerous than it was a year ago, and the danger has come close. 2 glens off and moving, and the very officer they have to fear may be out on a night like this one, working the dark, climbing the braes by the light of the same late moon that is rising now over the eastern tops. What the drover's news does to the house is to sharpen it, to take the easy harvest night warmth and put an edge of watchfulness under it, and for a while after he has told it, the labour goes on more quietly and more carefully than before. The talk dropped low, an ear kept always half turned to the night beyond the wall. The still is charged again for a second run, the low whines from the first running put back through to be strengthened, the fire fed and steadied, and the quiet business resumes, but the ease has gone out of it, and a kind of listening has taken its place. And it is well into the small hours, with the moon up and a thin cold light lying over the glen and the second run flowing, that the sound they have all been half listening for finally comes. The dog, lying by the kitchen fire, lifts its head off its paws. Its body goes stiff. A low sound starts in its throat, not the tail-thumping welcome it gave the drover, but something else. A warning held back, its eyes fixed on the door, and its ears hard forward. And in the same instant, before anyone has moved, they all hear it too, faint and far and unmistakable, carried down on the still night air from somewhere up the dark shoulder of the hill above the house. The chink of a stone turned underfoot, a voice, low, and then another answering it. The careful sound of men moving in the dark where no honest business takes men at such an hour, coming down by the sound of it toward the township from the open hill above. Everything happens at once and almost without a word, for this is a moment the house has rehearsed in its mind 100 times against the hour it should ever come. Iron is already moving. He takes up the iron pail of water that stands ready for exactly this, and douses the fire under the still in a single hissing cloud of steam and ash, killing the light and the heat and the betraying smell of it as far as one act can, and in the same breath, More has the good jar of spirit up off the floor and into her arms. The lamp in the kitchen is turned down until its flame is the merest bead of blue, and then pinched out altogether, so that the house drops at a stroke into darkness, lit only by the dull red of the dying peats on the kitchen hearth, and even those iron rakes flat and smores with ash until the room is nearly black. The children, the 2 awake ones, are gathered in against the wall and told in a whisper that carries the full weight of the moment to be silent, and they are, for even the youngest understands now, without being told that something has come that the family fears. The drover is on his feet by the door, still as a post. Old Domhnall has not moved from his corner, but his eyes are open in the dark, and his hand has closed on the head of his stick, and they wait, the houseful of them, scarcely breathing, in the blind dark, listening with the whole of their bodies to the sounds coming down the hill. It is a long few minutes, and it is worth your dwelling in, for it holds in it the whole of what this life is. The fear and the watchfulness and the knowledge that everything a family has can be taken by men with the law at their backs, that the careful labour of years stands always one bad night from ruin. The footsteps come on down the hill. The low voices come with them, near enough now that a word or two can almost be made out, the flat, unfamiliar speech of men who are not of the glen. There is the sound of them passing the head dyke, coming in among the upper houses of the township, and in the blackness of the kitchen, Iane stands by the doused fire with the empty pail still in his hand, and his whole life held in the balance of the next few minutes. For if they come to this door, if they ask to come in, if they go through to the gable end and find the warm copper and the smell of the run and the tail still standing in their vessel, then the night is lost and the still is lost and the rent is lost, and a fine they cannot pay is laid on them, and all of it, the harvest gladness, and the careful work and the family's frail margin against the hard year coming, comes down in an hour. He does not move. None of them moves. The footsteps and the voices reach the heart of the township, and pause, and there is a long, terrible silence in which anything might happen, and the family stands in the dark of their own home, waiting to learn which way the night will fall. And then, slowly, the night gives them back their lives. The voices move on. The footsteps do not turn toward the lower houses but go on through the township and out the far side of it, down toward the mouth of the glen and the track that leads away south, fading as they go, until there is nothing left of them at all but the ordinary sounds of the dark, the burn talking below, the wind moving in the thatch, a beast shifting in the byre. They were not, it seems, coming for this township at all. Perhaps they were the gauger and his party after all, passing through on their way to some other glen on some word of their own, and the family was never their business this night. Perhaps they were something else entirely, men about some other secret errand in the dark, smugglers of another kind, or none of these things. The house will never know. What it knows is that the danger has passed it by, that the footsteps have gone, that the cold sweat of the last minutes can be let go, and one by one the held breaths are let out and the bodies unclench, and a kind of weak, shaky laughter goes round the blacked-out room, the laughter of people who have been very frightened and are frightened no longer. It is a still moment before anyone trusts the quiet enough to make a light, but at last Iron feels his way to the hearth and rakes the ash off the buried peats and blows them back to a glow and gets the lamp lit again from a splinter, and the small warm room comes back out of the dark around them. The same room with the same faces in it, gone gaunt and bright-eyed with the fright they have had, and the night that might have ended their world goes on. There is no thought of running the still again tonight. The fright has been too near for that, and besides the work is all but done, and what is left is to make safe what they have, and this last labour is done quickly and quietly while the nearness of the danger is still on them. The spirit of the night, the good clear heart of it caught hours ago, and the strengthened spirit of the second run is measured out and funnelled into the small wooden casks that have stood ready, waiting for it. The casks that the drover will carry south, and the casks are bunged tight and a mark known to the house, and the drover scratched on each, and then they are carried out, 2 of the men to it in the dark, to the place that every such house keeps against exactly this need, the hiding place for the maid spirit. In this house it is a dry hollow under the floor of the byre, a stone-lined cavity beneath the beasts where no searcher would readily look, and the warmth of the cattle keeps the damp off, and the casks are lowered into it, and the flagstone laid back over, and the byre litter scuffed across the join until there is nothing to show. Other houses have other places, a cleft in the rocks up the burn, a false bottom in the meal kist, a hole in the peat stack, the inherited cunning of generations of people who have had to hide the fruit of their work from the men who would take it, and with the casks hidden and the still itself wiped down and cooled, and the foreshots and tails poured away, and the gable end made as innocent as a swept hearth can be, the work of the night is at last truly finished, the labour and the fear and the craft of it all behind them, and the family can turn, near worn out now, and the small hours well advanced, to the wind down of the night before their beds are sought. Before we follow the family to their rest, there is time in the loosened hour after the fright, while the men sit on by the embers too, stirred up yet for sleep, and the casks lie safe under the byre floor, to understand the matter that has hung over the night, which is the law, and why a devout and honest family should be made criminals for turning their own barley into spirit on their own hearth. It was not always so. In the old days, in the days old Domhnall's grandfather would have known, a man distilled as freely as he baked, the still as common in the house as the girdle, and no one thought of it as a matter the state had any business with. The change came from far away, and came slowly, and was never understood in the glens, only suffered. Back against Signes Stegas. Det inkommt mig nimbus tomtelig och det måste inte gå med. Perplexed pitting Ken står same. Det måste sen för steg that speeder, and that safe it. Ye can depths, it's sake. That's so extends at that ponting to base. The least up Peter steget, and explain to means that high some take a stag, he can kid tate and let to sections. Dick is no zappers. That bargain made in the south by men, the Highlands had never chosen, which brought the heavier excise of England north over the border and set it on the Scottish still. From that day the making of whisky was split in two. There was the legal kind, taxed and licensed and watched, which only a man with capital and a lowland market could afford to attempt. And there was the other kind, the kind that had always been made now in secret, because the tax upon it was more than the spirit could bear and be sold. Made in 10,000 small stills in 10,000 glens by people who saw nothing wrong in it and never would. For that is the heart of the matter, and you must hold it to understand these people at all. They did not feel themselves to be doing wrong. To the family by this fire, and to the township entire, and to the Highlands very nearly, the tax on the spirit was not a law in any sense that bound the conscience, but simply a robbery attempted by a distant government, to be evaded as one would evade any robbery, by cunning and by silence and by the help of one's neighbours. The grain was their own, the labour was their own, the skill was their own and their mothers before them. That a parliament in the south should claim a cut of the result and send armed men into the hills to enforce the claim, seemed to them not justice but its opposite, and the gauger who climbed the glen to smash a poor family's still was not, in their eyes, an officer of the law, but a sort of licensed thief. And so the country entered into a long, quiet war with its own government over a kettle of malt, a war fought not with arms, but with concealment and warning, and the flat refusal of a people entire to inform on one another, and it was a war the Highlands very largely won. For the stills went on by the thousand whatever the law decreed, and the spirit went on flowing south by the droves, and the most that the gaugers could do, with their few numbers in that vast and roadless country, was to catch the unlucky few and make examples of them, as they had lately made an example in the next glen. But one, it was a long game of wits, this quiet war, and both sides played it with a kind of grim skill, and you should see how it was fought, for it shaped the very nerves of a running knight like this one. On the maker's side, there was an inherited craft of concealment and warning that had nothing to do with the making of the spirit, and everything to do with not being caught. At it, there were the hiding places, the cleverest the people could devise, the cavity under the byre floor, the cleft up the burn, the false bottom in the meal kist, the peat stack hollowed to take a cask. There were the lookouts, a boy set on a height on a running night to watch the approaches and carry word, and the warning signals passed from township to township, a light shown or hidden, a word sent ahead by a running child, so that the news of a gauger abroad in the district could outrun the gauger himself up the braes. There was the choosing of the time, the dark of the moon, the wild night when no officer would willingly be out, the long autumn dark that gave hours of cover. And there was the absolute silence of the people entire, the refusal to inform that no bribe and no threat could often break, which left the officer blind in a country where every soul knew what he wanted to know, and no soul would tell him. Against all this the gauger had only his few men, his authority, and his wits, and his was a hard and a friendless office, for he was the most hated man in any district he worked, shunned and lied to and led astray, and sometimes, when he pressed too hard, met with open violence, ambushed on a lonely road, his seizures rescued from him by force, himself beaten and sent back empty-handed with a warning to trouble the glen no more. Some gaugers were honest and dogged, and earned a grudging respect even from the people they hunted. Some were cruel, and some were corrupt, and took the bribe and looked away, and the spirit flowed on past them as freely as the burn. It was a war without honour and without end, fought in the dark over a kettle of malt, And the family listening tonight for the footstep on the hill is one small player in a contest that ran the length of the Highlands for the better part of 200 years. While the talk of the law runs on, old Domhnall stirs again and adds to it the longer reach of his memory, for he likes to set a matter in its full length when he can, and the spirit, he says, is far older than any tax upon it, older than the Parliament that first taxed it, and the proof of it is written down. He has heard, in the books of the kings, away back. There is a record, the old man says, that he had from a lettered man years ago, and has never forgotten, of a friar in the East Country, in the time of one of the old King Jameses, given a great quantity of malt by the king's own command to make aqua vitae, the water of life in the Latin of the Church. And that, the lettered man told him, was 300 years gone, in the 1400s, and was the oldest writing down of the making of the spirit in all Scotland. And it was old even then, Domhnall says, for the friars only set down what the people had long done, and the knowledge of the strong water had come into the country through the houses of religion, the monks who kept the learning of the old world alive, who had the art from older lands across the sea, where it had been used first of all by the physicians and the makers of medicines. The spirit was a healing draught before it was anything else, he tells them, a craft of the apothecary and the wise wife, given for the cramp and the flux and the ague, rubbed on aching joints, dropped on a dying tongue, and only slowly, over the long generations, did it come down off the physician's shelf and into the common life of the people, and become what it is now, the dram of welcome, and the drink of the feast, and the cargo on the drover's pony. The room takes the old man's history in quietly, the children half asleep against the warm stone now, and the sense of the great age of the small night's work settles over them, the knowledge that the clear spirit cooling in the still tonight is the latest drop of a stream that has run through this country for longer than its written memory. There is the still itself to wonder at, too, sitting cooling now in its dark cell, for it is the one piece of bought and worked machinery in a house that makes almost everything else it owns with its own hands, and it has a history and a worth all its own. Most of what fills this home was made within it or near it, the furniture knocked together from hill timber and bog oak, the dishes turned from wood or thrown by a local hand, the cloth spun and woven under this roof, the very ropes twisted from heather. But the still is copper, and copper must be bought, and it must be worked by a smith who knows the trade, hammered and beaten and shaped, and the seams of it brazed tight, and that is a costly skill found only in the towns or in the hands of a few travelling craftsmen who serve the trade in secret. A still represents, to a family like this, a real outlay of hard-won money, or an inheritance carefully kept, and it is mended and patched and cherished accordingly, the dents knocked out, the worn places rebrazed, passed from one generation to the next, as a treasure of value, hidden as carefully as the spirit it makes when danger threatens. For to lose the still to a gauger is to lose not only the night's work, but the very means of all the nights to come. The shape of it is the fruit of long trial, the round belly to hold the wash, the swan neck to carry the vapour up and over, the worm to cool it down, every curve of it settled by generations of makers into the form that gives the cleanest spirit. And though no one in this glen could write a word of the science of it, they understand the working of it in their hands, as surely as they understand the working of the seasons, by doing and watching and the deep inheritance of a craft passed mother to daughter and father to son in exactly such kitchens as this one, on exactly such nights. And this house is not alone in its work tonight, which is a matter worth your dwelling on, for it is the deepest difference between this glen and the lonelier kind of Highland life, and it is the very condition that makes the work possible. Go up onto the dark shoulder of the hill above the township, in the mind, and look down on the scatter of dwellings along the burn, and you would see, if you knew how to read it, that this house is one light among several keeping the same late watch. 3 or 4 of the dozen chimneys are smoking past the hour, when honest suppers are long cleared and honest folk asleep, and behind those gables the same labour is going on that has gone on behind this one, the same copper warming, the same clear thread falling, the same careful watching of the dark. The autumn after the harvest is the running season for the township at once. The grain in, and the nights grown long enough to give cover, and the houses take their turns and keep their secrets and watch the hill for one another. For the danger of the gauger is a danger shared, and the compact that holds the township is the plainest fact in the place. No one informs. No one ever informs. A man might quarrel with his neighbour over a strayed beast or a boundary or a slight 20 years old and nurse the grievance to his grave, but he would no more carry word of his neighbour's still to the excise than he would set fire to his own roof, for the still is the one secret every house holds in common, the shared defiance that binds the place together against the world below, and to break the silence would be to break the township itself. It is this, more than anything, that defeats the law in a country like this. A gauger may climb the glen and smash a still, but he can never find the stills he is not led to, and no one in all the township will ever lead him, and so the secret holds. House covering house, year upon year, the settlement bound into one body by the work it does together in the dark and never speaks of in the light. The township shares more than its hidden trade, of course, for the working of the land in common runs through all of its life, and there are pieces of the place that belong to no one family but to all of them together, and the meal that fed tonight's supper passed through one of them. Down the glen, where the burn runs strong enough to turn a wheel, stands the mill, a low huddled building over the water with its great stone wheel and its grinding stones, and to it the families of the township carry their grain to be ground, for the grinding of meal by water is the miller's trade, and the families are bound, by old custom and the chief's will, to bring their corn to his mill, and to leave him his share of it in payment, the multure a portion of every load. The miller is a man apart, neither quite of the township nor outside it, dusty and shrewd, and often grumbled at for the size of his cut, and the mill is a place of gathering and gossip, where the news of the glen is traded over the rumble of the stones. There is the kiln too, the drying kiln where the grain and the malt are dried over the slow peat fire before grinding, sometimes a family's own, and sometimes shared, and there are the stackyards and the common grazing and the peat banks, all of them worked or held in common, all of them binding the families into the one body that they are. It is a life with very little that is wholly private in it, and a great deal that is shared, the land, the labour, the mill, the grazing, the secret, the very warmth of the gathered houses, and it is the sharing, more than anything, that makes it bearable, for a family alone could not survive in this country, and it is only as a township, a community woven tight by custom and need and kinship, that the people here can wrest a living from so hard a ground at all. The spirit they make does not stay in the glen, of course, and you should follow it in the mind down the road it travels, for the hidden trade has a shape and reach to it, that the family by this fire is only the first link of. The casks that the drover takes south go to a particular man, a byre, who has his own place in a chain that runs all the way down to the thirsty towns of the lowlands and beyond. He may be the keeper of a change house, an inn on one of the droving roads, who takes the Highland spirit in quietly and sells it on to travellers and carriers and turns a profit on the secret. He may be a merchant in one of the small southern towns who has a back room and a discreet clientele and asks no questions about the excise stamp the casks do not carry. He may pass it on again to a dealer in the city, where the cheap, fierce Highland spirit, watered and sweetened and given a respectable name, finds its way into the glasses of people who would be astonished to learn that their dram was run in a stone shed at the head of a sea loch by a family hiding from the king's officers. The trade works on trust and silence, every link of the chain knowing only the link on either side of it, the drover trusting the buyer and the buyer trusting the dealer, the money flowing up the chain as the spirit flows down it, and the law forever a step behind, smashing the odd still and seizing the odd cask, and never coming near to stopping a trade that the country, high and low, is quietly in on. For the towns want the spirit as badly as the glens want the silver, and a demand and a supply so well matched will always find a way past any law that stands between them. No. The fire under the still is out now, and the fire in the kitchen burns low, but no fire in this house burns anything but the peat, and the peat is worth a word of its own, for it is the fuel of the country, and the maker of half the character of the spirit, and a labour in itself as great as any in the year. There is no coal in this glen, and there are few enough trees, and what warms the house and dries the malt and cooks the food is the dark turf of the bog, cut from the hill in the long days of the early summer and dried and carried home and stacked against the year. The winning of it is one of the fixed great labours of the warm months, the township turning out to the peat banks on the moss above the houses, the men cutting the wet black bricks of it from the bank with the long-bladed peat iron, throwing them up to the women and children who spread them on the heather to drain the whole family at it together for days, and then the back-breaking work of turning them as they dry, and footing them, standing them on end in little stacks to let the wind through, and at last, when they are light and hard and dry, the carrying of them home, creel by creel on the women's backs, or load by load on the garrons, to build the great peat stack against the gable that must see the house through till the next summer's cutting. It is the peat that scents this entire country, the sweet heavy reek of it that hangs in the rafters and soaks into the cloth and the hair and the very skin of the people, and it is the peat, above all, that goes into the whisky, for the smoke that dried the malt was peat smoke, and the dark sweetness it laid into the grain is the taste of the bog itself, the taste of the hill, carried in the spirit wherever the spirit travels, so that a man drinking the dram in a town far to the south is tasting, without knowing it, the very moor that the family cut their winter fuel from in the long light of a Highland June. The drover, warming his hands at the kitchen fire while the men talk, is the bringer of more than the trade, and as the evening wears on toward its turn he gives the family the other gift he carries, the news of the wider age, for he is the one among them who has lately been down in the country where matters happen, and the glen is hungry for word of it. The year is 1795, and away beyond the hills, beyond the trysts and the towns, the great world is in one of its periods of upheaval, and even here, even at the head of this remote glen, the tremor of it is beginning to be felt. There is a war on, the drover says, a great war with the French across the sea, who have cut off the head of their own king and turned the order of things upside down, and are now at arms against half of Europe, and the king's recruiting parties are abroad in the country looking for men. The Highlands, he says, have become a great nursery of soldiers, the very straths that were disarmed and broken after the last rising, now scoured for their young men to fill the king's regiments, and as there is hardly a township in the country that has not sent its sons away to the wars, some willingly for the bounty and the adventure, and some far less willingly, pressed and persuaded and shamed into it by the very chiefs who once led them out for a very different cause. The irony of it is not lost on old Domhnall, who marched out 50 years ago against this same king's grandfather and walked home from the breaking of that hope, and who has lived to see the grandsons of the men who fought beside him, then marching away in this same king's coat to die in foreign fields for a cause that is none of theirs. The wider age is reaching the glen, and not gently. It comes in the recruiting sergeant and the rising rents and the first far-off rumours of a new way of using the land, and the family takes the news in soberly, and the children listen wide-eyed to the talk of battles and far places. An hour holds for a while the strange double knowledge of a world very old and an age changing fast, both present at once in the one smoky room. There is the kirk to reckon with, too, in any true account of the spirit and its place, for these are godly people, stern Presbyterians of the established Church of Scotland, and the relationship between their religion and the dram is a tangled and a very human knot. The Church in its official voice frowns on strong drink, preaches against drunkenness as a sin and a ruin, sets its face against the excess that whiskey can bring, and the minister, when there is one within reach, will thunder from his pulpit against the curse of the bottle with the best of them. And yet, the same minister will take his dram when he calls at a house and think no wrong of it, for the line in this country is drawn not between drink and abstinence, but between the decent use of the spirit and the disgrace of drunkenness. And the decent use of it runs through all of life like a thread. The spirit is there at every threshold a person crosses. It wets the head of the newborn child, a drop on the lips at the christening. It seals the bargain and the betrothal. It is the heart of the wedding, the toasts and the healths drunk round, and it is poured as freely at the funeral, where the long custom of the country is to send the dead off with a generous dram for all the mourners, so that a burial in the glen could be a heavy-headed business for those who carried the coffin the miles to the old ground. It is the welcome pressed on every guest who crosses the door, the diolch a doriae, the cup at the door given to the traveller setting out again into the cold. It is the medicine still, given for the chill and the colic and the low spirits, and given, God forgive them, to the children for the croup. And above all, it is the soul of the great midwinter feast, the New Year, the one unbridled festival of this hard-working and hard-praying people, when the spirit flows as it flows at no other time, and the houses go round visiting in the dark of the year's turning with the bottle carried first foot from door to door. The church might preach against it. The people went on, as people do, drawing the line where their own good sense drew it, and the spirit kept its place at the centre of every gathering that marked the passage of a life. It is worth your knowing, before we leave the still to its cooling, what the spirit they have made tonight is actually like, for it is not the smooth amber liquor that the word may bring to your mind, and the difference tells you much about the age. What runs from the worm in a glen like this is new spirit, raw spirit, clear as water and fierce as fire, drawn off and casked and sold, and very often drunk within the month, with none of the long sleep in the wood that gives the spirit of a later age its colour and its mellowness. The folk here do not age their whisky, for the most part, and could not afford to if they wished, for spirit laid by in a cask is money laid by unspent, and a family that needs the silver for the rent cannot let its crop sleep for years in a barrel. So the dram of this country and this century is a young and a hard and a smoky spirit, warmed by the peat and roughened by the haste of its making, an acquired taste even to those reared on it, nothing like the slow matured spirit that the world will one day prize. That gentler dram lies in the future, and it is a strange thought on this evening that the very haste and roughness that mark the spirit now will one day be cured by the one gift this family can least afford, which is time, the patient sleep of the spirit in oak that draws the harshness out of it and the colour and the smoothness in, so that the whisky the age will come to love is the whisky this family could never make, because to make it they would have had to be rich enough to wait. The casks under the byre floor hold the rough young water of life of an old hard world, and they will be drunk within the season, and the smoothness, and the colour, and the great age, and the cherished name all lie in a future that not a soul in this room could imagine, and that would not, if they could see it, do them or their kind the smallest good. There is the water to thank as well, for none of tonight's labour would be possible without it, and the people here know its worth as the people of the dry south can scarcely imagine. The burn that comes down off the hill behind the house, the one that fills the cooling tub and cools the worm and turns the vapour back to spirit, is the lifeblood of the undertaking, and it is no ordinary water. It rises high on the moor, in the peat and the granite of the tops, and it comes down soft and clean and cold and faintly brown with the peat it has run through, and that softness, the people will tell you, is half the secret of a good dram, for hard water makes a harsh spirit, and the soft hill water makes a kind one. A still must be set where good cold water runs close by, and the siting of this house, generations ago, took account of the burn as much as of the shelter and the ground. For the water serves the family a dozen ways, for the drinking and the cooking and the washing and the watering of the beasts and the driving once of the little mill down the glen, and for this secret autumn work above all. In a dry summer, when the burn runs low and warm, the spirit suffers and the running is slow and difficult, and a wet cold autumn such as this one, with the burn full and icy off the recent rains, is the running season's friend, for the colder the water, the better the worm does its work and the cleaner the spirit comes. So the very weather that makes the glen a hard place to live, the long rains and the chill, is the weather that makes its one cash crop, and the family blesses the full icy burn tonight as it curses the same burn in the floods of February. For in this country the same hand that takes also gives, and the water that is the burden of the place is also its quiet wealth. The making of a fine spirit is not done in a single passage through the still either, and you should understand the doubling of it, for it is why the night is so long, and the watching so patient. The first time the wash is run through, what comes over is weak and rough, the low wines, scarcely stronger than a stout ale and not fit to keep or to sell, and if the family stopped there they would have wasted the night. The low wines must be run a second time, put back into the cleaned still, and heated again, and drawn off again, and it is only in this second running, the doubling, that the true strong clean spirit is made, for the second passage concentrates what the first only began, and throws off, in the foreshots and the tails, the rank stuff that would spoil it. So a proper night's work is 2 runnings at the least, the singling and then the doubling hours of it, the still charged and run and emptied and cleaned and charged again, the fire held even through all of it, the worm-water kept cold through all of it, the cut judged afresh in the second run as carefully as in the first. It is slow, exacting, sleepless work, and it is why the makers of the glen choose the long nights of the back end of the year for it, when there are hours enough of darkness to see 2 runnings through before the dangerous light of morning, and why a working night leaves the household grey and hollow-eyed the next day, having watched the copper and fed the fire and minded the water from the supper hour to the small hours without a wink between. Tonight's 2 runs are done now, the doubling finished, the strong spirit caught and casked and hidden, and the sleepless patience of it is told in the faces round the dying fire. But the spirit in the casks is the true doubled water of life, and it is worth in silver every watch of the night that made it. And in all of this, do not lose sight of the boy, for tonight is young Hyen's night as much as anyone's. The evening he was first let across the line into the grown men's secret work, and what is happening to him in this smoky room is as real as anything the still has made. He is 12, old enough to be useful, and not yet old enough to be told everything. And until tonight, the running of the still was an act that happened past his bedtime, half known, never seen, a closed door he was sent away from. Tonight the door was opened to him. He was given the worm tub to mind, a real charge with real consequence, and he stood out in the cold, and did it well. And he was there for the first thread of spirit, and there for the cut, and there, white-faced like all of them, for the terror of the footsteps on the hill. And he is one of the people of the house now in a way he was not this morning, bound into the secret, trusted with the silence. He has learned this evening, without anyone setting out to teach him, the deepest lessons of his world. He has learned that his family does, of necessity and without shame, what the law forbids. He has learned what it is to fear the men who keep that law, and to outwit them, and he has felt in his own chest the cold of the hiding, and the weak joy of the danger passing. He has learned that the warm spirit is not made to be drunk, but to be turned into the silver that keeps the roof over his head, that the rent is a hard master, and the still its secret servant, and that the apparently solid life of his family rests on this hidden hazardous labour done in the dark. He is being made, tonight, into a man of his glen and his century, with all that this means of skill and secrecy and quiet defiance, and the boy who seeks his bed at the end of this night is not the boy who woke in it, and old Domhnall, watching him from the warm corner, knows it, and says nothing, for there is nothing to say, and it is the way of all life, and it was so for Ian and so for Domhnall himself, 3 generations back, in this same room, on just such a night. And there is a hope folded into the labour of this autumn that you should know, for it gives the evening its forward lean and makes the silver they are making more than a matter of keeping the roof where it is. Ian and More do not work only to stand still like careful people in any age. They have a quiet ambition, modest by the reckoning of the world below, but large enough in their own, and it shapes the way they count every coin the cattle and the casks will bring. They would like, in time, to better their place. They would like the boy, young Ian, when he comes to be a man, to have a holding of his own, and not merely a corner of his father's, a tack with a fair stretch of ground to it, and stock enough to work it, a start in the world that would set him up as a man of some small standing in the glen, as his father is, as his grandfather was before the hard years. It is for this, as much as for the rent, that they hoard and contrive and take the risks of the running night, putting by what little they can beyond the bare demand of the term day, against the day when a holding might fall vacant, and a man with a little silver behind him might take it. It is a thrifty, patient, generational kind of hope, the hope of people who think not in seasons but in lifetimes, who plant for children they may not live to see grown. And it is the same hope that has built and held the township across the centuries, each generation contriving to pass on to the next a little more than it received, or at the least no less. There is a tenderness in it, and looking on from where we sit there is a sorrow in it too, for we know what they do not, that the holding they dream of for the boy will not be there to take, that the ground itself will be swept out from under all of their life within the span of the boy's own life, and that the careful silver they are making tonight against a future of their own choosing is being made against a future that will be chosen for them. Far away, by men who have never seen the glen and never will. But they cannot know it, and they should not, and tonight the hope is bright and reasonable and their own, and it warms the cold hours of the work as surely as the fire does, that the tipper boy grown and settled, and a man of the glen with his own fire and his own fields and his own children at his knee on just such a night as this. The rent itself, the thing all this labour serves, is worth your understanding in its own right, for it is the iron fact at the bottom of the family's year, the fixed demand around which everything else must arrange itself. Twice in the year, at the term days, the old quarter days that divide the Highland calendar, the rent falls due, and the heaviest of the 2 reckonings comes in the autumn, after the harvest and the sales, when a family is expected to have turned its year's increase into the silver the factor wants. On the appointed day, the tenants of the township make their way to the place of paying, the tacksman's house or the factor's office down the glen, and there, in a business that is half ceremony and half dread, the accounts are gone over, and the money is laid down on the table, coin by hard-won coin, and the receipt is given, and the family's tenure of its house and land is secured for another half-year. To fall short is a serious matter, not a case of a stern word and a second chance, but a loss that can cost a family its holding, for there are always others wanting land and a factor under his own orders to raise what he can, and the sums do not always sit easily with what the year has yielded. The cattle may have sold poorly, the price beaten down by some glut or fear in a market the family had no part in. The harvest may have been thin, and yet the rent stands where it stood, due in full, and rising, for the landlords of this age have learned to want more than their fathers wanted, and the gap between what the land gives and what the rent demands is the gap the family must somehow fill. It is into that gap that the silver from the casks under the byre floor will go, the cattle money eked out by the whisky money, and only the two together, in a hard year, will see the rent paid and the holding kept, which is why the night's forbidden work is not a luxury or a vice, but a necessity as plain as the ploughing, the difference very often between a family that holds its place and a family that does not. There is a gladder side to this life too, and you should not leave the glen thinking it all labour and fear, for the same closeness that binds the township in its secret binds it also in its pleasures, and the long dark half of the year, for all its hardship, is the season of the ceilidh, the going from house to house in the evenings, that is the social life of the place. On the ordinary evenings, the nights when no still is running, the people of the township visit, dropping in on one another after the day's work without ceremony or invitation, gathering by one fire or another to pass the hours of the dark, and these gatherings are the theatre and the library and the newspaper and the school of a people who have none of those things in any other form. There is talk, endless talk, of the beasts and the weather, and the doings of the glen, and the doings of the world, as the drovers bring it. There are the stories, the old tales told and retold by the firelight, the heroic lays and the tales of the fairy folk and the ghosts, a literature entire carried in the memory and performed in the dark. There is the music, for there is hardly a township without its fiddler or its piper, and the songs go round, the ones everyone knows, the work songs and the love songs and the laments, and on a good night the floor is cleared and there is dancing, the reels and the strathspeys, the young folk stepping it out on the beaten earth to the scrape of the fiddle, while the old folk look on and tap their feet and remember. It is a poor place by every outward measure, this glen, and yet it is rich past the reckoning of richer places in exactly the riches that richer settlements lose, in company and music and story, and the deep belonging of people who have known one another all their lives, and the family at this fire, hard pressed as they are, would not, if you asked them, change their place for any other under heaven. Hospitality is the law of this country, the deepest of its unwritten laws, and you have seen it tonight in the welcome given the drover, but it goes far beyond the welcome of a known friend, for the door of a Highland house stands open to the stranger as readily as to the neighbour, and the giving of food and fire and a bed to whoever comes is not a kindness here, but a sacred duty older than the kirk. A traveller benighted in the hills may knock at any door in any township and be sure of his welcome, given the best the house can offer, the seat nearest the fire, a share of the supper, however little there is, a bed of heather or a spot by the hearth, and the cup at parting, and all of it given without thought of payment or any expectation of return, for it is understood that the giver may himself be the benighted traveller tomorrow, and that in a country so wide and so wild and so empty, the open door is what makes travel and life itself possible. There is a weariness folded into the welcome, to be sure, on a night like this one, when a stranger at the door might be the gauger or his spy, and the secret work makes the open-handed people watchful as they would not naturally be. But even tonight, even with the still warm and the danger near, a true benighted traveller would be taken in and warmed and fed, the work hidden and the welcome offered. For the duty of hospitality runs deeper even than the fear of the law, and to turn a soul away into the cold and the dark would be a shame no family of the glen could carry. The open door, the shared fire, the offered cup, these are the marks of the country at its best, and they are of a piece with the closeness that runs through everything here. The understanding that no one survives this life alone, that the warmth one gives is the warmth one will need, and that a people pressed this hard against the edge of the world must hold to one another or perish each apart. Step out with me for a moment, now into the night itself, for Ian goes out before he seeks his bed to look to the beasts, and to satisfy himself that all is quiet, and the country he steps into is worth the seeing. The rain has gone off, and the sky has cleared while the work went on, and the night that was thick and close earlier is open now and enormous, the moon down behind the western hills, and the stars out in a multitude that the people of the lit towns can no longer even imagine, flung across the black from rim to rim of the glen in a brightness that throws faint shadows on the frosting ground. The cold has come down hard with the clearing, the first real bite of the back end of the year, and the breath smokes, and the puddles in the track are skinning over, and the silence is total, the deep mountain silence that is itself a gift the lower world has lost, a silence so wide that the talk of the burn in it only deepens the quiet around it, and a stag belling far off on the hill seems to come from the edge of the world. The township lies dark and low along the water, the late fires all smored now, not a light showing, the houses crouched under the great wheel of the stars like sleeping beasts. And beyond them the hill rises black and silent into the blazing sky, empty, enormous, indifferent, the same hill that the footsteps came down a few hours since, and that holds somewhere in its folds tonight. Who knows what other secret workers, what other watchers, what other families keeping the same hazardous faith with the same hidden fires. Ian stands a moment in the cold and the starlight, a small figure at the door of a small house at the head of a glen at the edge of the inhabited earth, and feels, as a man does at such an hour, the great age and indifference of the country pressing in around the small warm fact of his family and his work, and then he turns and goes in, to the byre first and then to the fire, leaving the night to itself. Back within, the worst of the night's labour over and the danger gone by, there comes the modest reward of it, the dram by the fire, for a little of the spirit is always kept back from the casks, a measure poured off the house itself, and now in the loosened hour the men take their share. It is the new spirit, raw and clear and fierce, and it is taken neat and in sparing quantity, a mouthful savoured rather than a draught swallowed, and the taking of it is a quiet companionable ceremony, the cup passed from hand to hand around the hearth, Ian and the drover and old Domhnall, a word of health said over it in the Gaelic, the fire warm on their faces, and the great tiredness of the night settling into their bones. There is a deep contentment in this moment, the particular animal contentment of work done and danger past and warmth and company, and the burn of the good spirit in the chest, and you can read it in the easing of the men's shoulders and the low unhurried run of their talk. The dram is more to these people than a pleasure, though it is that. It is the warmth that meets the cold of their country, the cheer that meets the hardness of their lives, the warmth that loosens the tongue for the story and the song, that warms the traveller off the hill, and the mourner at the grave, and the watcher through the long night. And there is a wisdom in their use of it, on the whole, a knowing of its place, that the later age, with its bottles and its excess, would do well to have kept. They drink little, and they drink it with respect, the men by this fire, and the dram they take tonight is the first fruit of their own labour, tasted at the source, the very water of life their own hands have drawn from their own grain, and there is a rightness in that first taste that no bought bottle could ever give. For all its place at the heart of their life, the making of the spirit is dangerous work in more ways than the law, and the family carries that knowledge too quietly, the way they carry all the hazards of their life. As still is fire and vapour under pressure in a confined space, and the spirit it makes is itself a stuff that burns, and the accidents of the trade are real and known and feared. A still left too long on too fierce a fire can boil over, the hot wash surging up into the head and the worm, a ruinous waste, and a scalding danger both. The spirit vapour, if it escapes and finds the flame, can flash and catch, and there are tales in every glen of a still house gone up in a roar of blue fire, of a maker burned, of a thatch caught, and a house lost in the night. The very secrecy of the work compounds its danger, for it is done by tired people in the small hours by poor light in a cramped place, with one ear always cocked for the gauger, and tiredness, and poor light, and divided attention are the makings of accidents. And there is the danger of the spirit itself, taken to excess, the ruin it can work in a weak man or a hard-pressed one, the households wrecked by it even here, the wisdom of the careful use of it bought, as such wisdom always is, at the cost of those who could not manage it. The family knows all this. They handle the fire with respect, and the spirit with respect. They keep the water close against the flames, and the children clear of the still, and they reckon the dangers of the work, the fire and the scald and the flash, and the slow danger of the dram itself, as part of the price of the silver it brings, one more hazard in a life made up of hazards, to be guarded against with care and accepted, in the end, at the cost of keeping a roof above their heads at the edge of the world. And of all that can betray a running night, the worst and the hardest to hide is the one that fills the house unseen, which is the scent of the labour itself. A still at its labour cannot be made silent and cannot be made invisible in the dark, but above all, it cannot be made to keep its scent to itself, for the running of the spirit throws off a heavy, sweet, unmistakable reek, the smell of hot malt and rising vapour and new spirit, that seeps out under the door and through the thatch and hangs about the gable on a still night, like a flag run up for any passing officer to read. On a windless evening such as this one, the scent of a working still can be caught a good way off by a nose that knows what it is smelling, and a gauger climbing a glen in the dark needs often no informer and no light, but only the wind in his face and the knowledge of what that sweetness on it means. It is one more reason the makers bless a wild night, and curse a still one, for a wind to carry the scent away and scatter it is a friend to the secret work, and a dead calm that lets it pool and linger about the houses is an enemy. Tonight is calm, and the family knows it, and it is part of why the ear is kept so sharp and the watch so close. The very air that lets them hear the footstep on the hill is the air that has been carrying the tale of their labour out into the dark for any who might be abroad to read, and the scent of the night's work, the proof of it, the sweet, warm, betraying breath of the spirit, has been drifting from the gable since the first peat was lit beneath the copper, beyond their power to call back or conceal. Come back to more now, sitting tired by the fire with the cup not yet come round to her, for the woman of this house has been at the centre of the night's work, and her place in it tells you something true about this country that the world below has mostly forgotten. It is easy, looking back, to picture the making of the spirit as men's labour, the man at the fire, and the still his domain, but that is not how it was, and it is not how it is in this house. The craft here is the woman's at least as much as the man's, and in its finer parts more hers than his, for it grows out of the labour of the dairy and the kitchen that are her province entirely, the managing of warmth and time and ferment, and the reading of a process by eye and nose and hand, that is the very heart of distilling, and the very heart of 100 other things a capable wife does in a day. Maud learned her craft from her mother, in her mother's kitchen, as a girl, the way she learned the making of cheese and the curing of meat, and the brewing of ale, and it sits among her household skills as one more art a woman of this country must know, and the judging of the cut tonight, The moment the whole worth of the run hung on was hers because the nose for it was hers, trained through 20 autumns. She is the hands of this home in the daytime too, the keeper of its working order up before the rest to kindle the fire and milk the cow, managing the meal and the milk and the wool and the children and the endless turning labour of a household that makes nearly all it needs, and the still in the autumn is folded into that great competence as naturally as everything else. It is worth marking on an evening that has belonged so much to the men's fears and the men's history that the spirit cooling in the casks was drawn by a woman's judgment, and that in the long story of the water of life in this country, the women at the still are not the footnote, but very near the heart of the tale. And what, when all the reckoning of rent and silver and law is done, does the spirit truly mean to these people that they should take such risks and keep such faith to make it? The money is the plain answer, and it is the true one, the rent paid and the holding kept. But it is not all of the answer, for the dram is woven into the deeper life of the glen in a way that mere trade could never explain. It is in a hard country the great softener of hardship, the warmth carried inside against a cold that is always at the door, the small reliable kindness in a life with few enough kindnesses to spare. It is the loosener of the tongue and the lifter of the heart, the warmth that turns a gathering of tired people by a fire into an evening of story and song, that gives the shy man his courage and the sorrowing one his ease, and the community its shared moments of warmth and laughter in the dark of the year. It is the mark of welcome and the seal of friendship, the cup that says you are no stranger here, the drink that meets the traveller and speeds the parting guest. It is bound into every great stage of living, the birth and the marriage and the death, present at all of them, a current of comfort running through the fabric of a person's days from the drop on the newborn's lips to the dram at the graveside. The people of this glen are not, on the whole, sentimental about it, any more than they are sentimental about their cattle or their grain, but the spirit is more to them than a cash crop for all that, and the name they give it, the water of life, carries a truth past its long history, for in an existence as bare and as cold and as pressed as theirs, the dram is one of the few comforts that is wholly their own, made by their own hands from their own grain, and there is a meaning in that, a dignity, that no tax and no gauger could ever quite take from them. There is a bond, too, behind all the hard reckoning of rent and silver, an older bond between these people and the man whose land they hold, and the slow loosening of that bond is as much a part of the coming change as the sheep or the law. In the world old Domhnall was born into, the chief was not a landlord in the southern sense at all, but the father and the head of his people, bound to them by blood and by name and by a web of duty that ran both ways, owing them protection and justice and a place on the land as surely as they owed him their service and their following, and when the call came, their swords. A chief was reckoned great, not by the rent he drew, but by the number of men he could raise, the strength of the name he led, and a man on his land was a kinsman and a fighting follower before ever he was a payer of rent. That world was broken on the moor 50 years ago, and in the hard years after it, when the carrying of arms was forbidden, and the chiefs were drawn south into a different life, and taught to see their acres with a different eye, and the change has worked its way down, slowly, into the daily bargain between the family and the ground, so that the tie which was once one of kinship and mutual duty has hardened season by season into one of money alone, the chief become a proprietor, the kinsman become a tenant, the following become a rent roll. The family by this fire still feels the old bond, still thinks of the chief as their own and themselves as his people, still carries the name with a quiet pride. But the bond is already half a memory, kept alive on the people's side after it has faded on the other, and the day is coming, though they cannot see it, when the man who holds their glen will reckon them not as his people at all, but as so many pounds of rent standing between him and the better return that the sheep would bring. And on that day the last thread of the old world will part. But old Domhnall, drowsing now in his corner with the empty cup beside him, carries a knowledge the rest of the room does not, and it lies like a shadow under the contentment of the night. For the old man can feel a change coming over his country that the others are too caught up in the present to see. He has lived through one great breaking already, the breaking of the old order after the rising, the disarming and the proscription, and the long humbling of the clans. And he has watched in the 50 years since the working out of that defeat, in ways that have nothing to do with swords. He has watched the chiefs change, slowly, from the fathers of their people into the landlords of their estates, drawn away to Edinburgh and to London, learning the southern way of reckoning a glen not by the men it could raise, but by the rent it could yield. He has watched the rents rise, season upon season, and the old easy tenures harden into hard money bargains, and he has heard, this last while, the first far-off word of a new order coming to the Highlands, a new way of using the land that has no place in it for people at all. There is talk, away to the south and the east, of a new use for the high country that has no need of people on it, a manner of farming that can be spread over a strath entire with a hand or two to tend it, and that fills a proprietor's purse as a township of families never could. He does not know the half of what it portends. He knows only the shape of the dread it raises in him, which is the same shape he felt rising once before, in the months before the world he was born to came apart. He says nothing of this to the room tonight. It is only a rumour yet, a trouble happening in other glens, and his own glen is full and busy, and seems as fixed as the hills. But the old man has seen a world end once before, and he knows the feel of it coming, and he looks at his grandchildren asleep against the warm stone, and at his son tired and content by the fire, and feels, without being able to say it, that the night they have lived through tonight, the harvest in and the spirit run, and the family gathered around its own hearth, is a peace more fragile than any of them knows, and that the country itself, the close-knit, secret, self-sufficient country of the township, is living on a borrowed and a shortening time. Gidja. Think while the house quietens of how a load as heavy as a cask of spirit ever leaves a glen like this one, for there are no carts here and nowhere to drive them, and the answer is the garran, the small, tough Highland pony that is the lorry and the wagon and the pack train of the country entire. The garran is a beast bred, like the black cattle, for hardiness over size, shaggy and sure-footed and patient, able to pick its way under a load over ground that would break the legs of a finer horse, up the stony tracks and across the bogs and through the fords, and it is on the garran's back that everything moves in this roadless land. The peats come home from the moor on the garran in summer, slunging creels on either flank. The meal comes back from the mill, the seaweed up from the shore for the fields, the few bought goods in from the distant town, and the casks of spirit go out the same way, two to a pony, roped on and balanced, and led away over the hill by paths that no wheel could follow and no stranger would find. The drover's own road south is a garran road for much of its length, and the spirit travels it slung on the patient backs of these little horses, mile after mile, day after day, down out of the hills to the places where wheels and roads and byres begin. It is a slow way of moving the world's goods, and a costly one in labour, but it is the only way this country has, and it shapes everything, for it means that nothing heavy and cheap can ever leave the glen at a profit, and only the light and the deer, the cattle that carry themselves and the spirit that packs small, can be turned into money, which is, when you trace it back, the reason the still burns at the gable end tonight. The autumn running is one face of the year, the dark face, and you should hold the other against it before the night closes, the bright high summer face, for the same family that crowds tonight into one smoky room spends the best weeks of the year scattered far up the hill in the open air, and the contrast is the very rhythm of their lives. In the early summer, when the low grass is wanted for the hay and the corn, the cattle are driven up off the township ground to the high summer pastures, the shielings, the green hollows high among the hills where the grass grows sweet and late, and a part of the family goes up with them to live, the young folk and the women, in the little turf huts that stand empty all the rest of the year and are roofed afresh each June. It is the gladdest season of all, the shieling time, a kind of holiday from the hard order of the township. The days spent herding the cattle on the high ground and milking them morning and evening, and turning the milk into the butter and the cheese that will help feed the house through the winter, but the evenings spent in the long northern dusk, with the songs and the talk and the courting that the shieling is famous for. The bairns run half wild on the tops. The old people, left below to mind the growing crops, are glad of the quiet, and the milk of those high summer weeks, the butter and the cheese laid by, is as much a part of the year's provision as the grain of the harvest, the cattle giving in summer what the rigs give in autumn. So the year swings between its poles, the open scattered freedom of the summer shieling, and the close secret labour of the autumn running, the high green hollow, and the smoky gable-end room, and the family that we have sat with tonight in the dark of the back end has another self entirely, a summer self, up on the bright hill with the cattle and the milk and the songs, that is as true a part of them as the watchers at the still. There is a story old Domhnall could tell, and has told, of the year the still was nearly lost, and it sits behind the fear of tonight like a shadow behind a shape, the family lore of the trade's worst night, handed down as a warning and a memory. It was long ago now, in Iron's grandfather's day, a running night much like this one, when the gauger did come, not passing through but knowing, led by some word that had got out, climbing straight to the right gable in the dark with his men behind him. There was no time to hide the still that night, only to scatter, and the family lost it. The copper carried off and broken up before their eyes, the spirit seized, the head of the house taken down the glen and brought before the justice, and fined a sum that took 2 years of hard living to pay back, a stretch in which the family went short of everything to find the money, and was never, the old man says, quite the same after. The still that runs tonight is the one bought at great cost and sacrifice to replace the one lost that night, and the memory of that loss is why this family is so careful, why the water pail stands always ready by the fire, why the hiding place under the byre is kept so well, why the ear is always half cocked to the hill. It is why, when the footsteps came down tonight, there was no hesitation and no panic, but a swift practised killing of the light and hiding of the spirit, for the family has learned in its own flesh what it costs to be caught, and it does not mean to be caught again. The fear is not abstract. It is the memory of a real night and a real loss, carried in the family as such memories are carried, shaping every running night that has come after, and it is part of what the boy has been taken into tonight, the knowledge that the danger is real, because it has fallen on this very house before. This one house and this one township are a single instance of what was happening, on the night we are imagining, across the vast sweep of the Highlands at once, and the scale of it is worth holding in the mind, for it explains why the law could never win. There were, in these years, many thousands of small stills at work in the glens of Scotland, uncounted and uncountable, in nearly every township, in nearly every valley, from the borders of the lowlands to the farthest northern and western shores. Whole districts were known for the quality of their spirit, their names already spoken of with respect by those who knew, the glens whose water and whose barley and whose maker's skill produced a dram above the common, and the spirit of those favoured places fetched the best prices in the secret market, and was sought out by the knowing buyers of the south. Against this ocean of small hidden making the excise could set only a handful of officers, a few hard-pressed gaugers spread thin across a country immense and roadless and hostile, each soul in it sworn by custom to silence, each hill and bog and cleft a hiding place, and the wonder is not that the gaugers caught so few, but that they caught any at all. The illicit trade was not a fringe or a crime of the desperate few. It was the ordinary economy of a whole society, the way an entire people turned its one abundant crop into the money a changing age demanded of it, and it ran, in defiance of the law, on a scale that made the law a kind of fiction, enforced by occasional violence against the unlucky and ignored, in practice, by almost everyone, high and low, who had any dealing with the spirit at all. The family by this fire is one candle in a great darkness full of such candles, one secret fire among thousands burning across the hills tonight, and the silver that trickles up out of all those hidden gable ends is, though no government ledger will ever record it, one of the true foundations on which the hard life of the Highlands is built. The night is far gone now, and the house begins at last to make ready for its rest, and the making ready has its own small, unhurried order, the order of a household that has done these same tasks in this same room every night of its life. The cup has gone its last round and been set by. The drover has been given his place, a bed made up for him on the bench by the fire with a plaid and a folded coat, the honoured guest given the warmest corner. And before any of them seeks the bed, there comes the smoring of the fire, the last and the most careful office of the evening, for the fire must never be let go out. To let the fire die would be more than an inconvenience. The cold hearth and the labour of kindling it afresh from flint or from a borrowed coal. It would be something closer to a small disaster, almost a kind of ill omen, for the fire is the life of the house, and its continuance from day to day is the continuance of the household itself. So the peats are not let burn away, but are smored, banked down for the night, the glowing embers gathered into the centre of the hearth and covered over with ash and with fresh peat laid round, so that the heart of the fire is kept alive and slow beneath its blanket, smouldering gently through the dark hours to be breathed back into flame at the first stir of the morning. More does it, as she does it every night, with a quiet attention that is half practical and half something older, and there are words that go with it, the smoring blessing, an old Gaelic prayer over the banked fire that calls the protection of the holy ones on the house, and all in it through the dark of the night, a charm worn smooth by centuries of nightly use, part Christian and part older than Christian, and she says it low, beneath her breath, as her mother said it, and her mother's mother, laying the ash over the embers, and with the saying of it the day is given back, and the night is entered, and the house is sealed for sleep. The beds are sought then, one by one, and there is little ceremony in the seeking of them, for the beds are in the same room. The life is lived in, and the going to them is only a few steps and a settling. The two older children, long since drooping, are got into the box bed against the wall, the great wooden press bed closed on 3 sides and curtained on the 4th, a little room of its own within the room, warm and dark and close, where they burrow down into the heather and the blankets beside the sleeping baby, and are gone almost before they are laid. Old Domhnall has his own bed in the warm angle by the hearth, the warmest place in the house given to the oldest, as the warmest place is always given, and he settles into it slowly, the memories of the night folding away behind his eyes, the marching and the moor and the water of life, and the change he feels coming, all of it sinking down into the old man's untroubled sleep. Ian and Moore have their bed against the inner wall, and they seek it last, when the others are settled, and the fire is safe, and the door is barred. The two of them lying down at the end of the long night, with the great tiredness of it on them, and the quiet knowledge between them that the work is done, and the spirit is made, and the casks are safe, and the rent, this year, will be found. The lamp is out. The house is dark but for the dull glow of the smoored hearth. And one by one the breathing of the household lengthens and slows and deepens into sleep. The children first, and then the old man, and then the drover by the fire, and last of all the man and his wife, until the house is asleep at once, the household down into the dark together, while outside the cold deepens toward the dawn, and the casks lie hidden under the sleeping cattle, and the burn runs on in the starlight, talking to itself, down the silent glen. The dawn comes slowly to a glen so deep among the hills, the light seeping down from the high tops long before it reaches the houses by the water, and the family wakes to it, as it has woken to every morning of its life, by the old habit of the body rather than by any clear summons. More stirs first, as she always does, slipping from the bed into the chill of the room while the rest are still under their blankets. And the first thing her hands do is the first thing they do every morning, to go to the smoored hearth and rake the ash from the buried embers, and breathe the slow heart of the fire back into flame, feeding it the dry peats until the blaze takes hold and the heat begins again to push back the night's chill. The kettle is swung over it. The grey light grows at the little shuttered window and under the door, and the house comes back to life around the rekindled fire, the children waking warm in the box bed, the old man stirring in his corner, the smell of the porridge beginning, the ordinary morning of an ordinary house reassembling itself as though the secret labour of the night had never happened at all. There is a great tiredness in all of them, the hollow grey weariness of a night without sleep, but there is no time to indulge it, for the beasts must be seen to, and the day has its work. And besides, there is the matter of the drove, which will be gathering now, and the casks that must go with it. For this is the morning the spirit leaves the glen, and the leaving of it is done quietly and quickly in the early light, before the world is well awake. The drover is up with the first of them, fed, and on his feet and out to see to the gathering of the cattle, and while the township stirs to its morning, the men go to the byre and lift the flagstone and bring up the casks from their hiding place under the floor, and load them onto the garron that stands waiting, two to the beast, roped on and balanced, and covered over with a creel and some gear, so that nothing shows but an honest pony with an honest load. The cattle marked for sale are loosed from the byres up and down the township, and driven out to join the growing herd on the green flat by the water, the beasts of a dozen houses mingling and milling and lowing in the cold morning air, the drovers and the lads moving among them with their sticks and their dogs, and into that gathering, unremarked, the laden garrons are led, the spirit of the glen folded in among the cattle for the long road south, the two crops of the country going down to the markets together. There is little ceremony in the parting. A few words between Iron and the drover, a clasp of hands, the understanding of the price and the man who will take the spirit at the end, and then the great slow herd is moving, flowing away down the glen toward its mouth with the dogs working its flanks, and the drover's calls ringing off the hills, the cattle and the casks, and the year's hope of silver, moving away south together into the morning, up-watched from the doors of the township, until the last of them is round the shoulder of the hill and gone, and the glen is left empty and quiet, and a little bereft behind them, the way a place always is when the year's great venture has set out, and there is nothing to do now but wait for the word of how it fared. And the family turns back to its day, and to its life, and there I could leave them, in the grey light of an autumn morning, with the spirit gone safe to market, and the rent as good as found, and the harvest in and the household gathered, and it would be a true ending, the ending of one good night in a hard but a sufficient life. But I have not told you quite the truth of this family and this glen if I leave them there, for we know you and I sitting where we sit, the thing that old Domhnall only feared, which is what came after, and it would not be honest to close the door on this warm room without saying gently what the years held for the world we have spent the night inside. For this is not a tale spun out of nothing. It is built up out of the true substance of a real time and a real country, out of the records and the accounts and the long memory of how the people of these glens actually lived, and the family we have sat with, though I have given them their names and their fire to make them real to you, stand for 10,000 families who lived very nearly this very night, and what overtook them is a matter of history, and it is coming on the morning we are leaving, very close. The first of the changes touched the very work we have watched tonight, and it came, when it came, almost as a mercy, though it broke the old world all the same. For close to 30 years after this night, in the early 1800s, the government in the south at last grew tired of fighting a war against the stills that it could never win, and changed its course, and brought in a new law in the year 1823 that made it possible for the first time for a man to distill his whisky lawfully without ruin, the duty cut to a bearable figure and a licence brought within reach. And slowly, over the seasons that followed, the secret trade came up out of the dark. The cannier and the better placed of the old illicit makers took out their licences and built their lawful distilleries, often on the very sites where their fathers had run the spirit in secret, by the same burns, with the same water, and the hidden craft of the glens became, by degrees, the great and famous and respectable industry whose names the age would one day know. The smuggler became the distiller, the gauger became in time almost a friend, an official to be dealt with rather than feared, and the rough young water of life of the hidden gable ends gave way, as the new lawful makers learned to lay their spirit by in oak and let it sleep, to the smooth, matured, amber spirit that the wider world would come to prize above all other spirits on the earth. It was a gain, beyond doubt. But something was lost in it too, the old wild independence of it, the craft every household did for itself in its own kitchen by its own skill, gathered up now into the great licensed houses, and gone for ever from the homes that had kept it alive through all the years of the law's hostility, and the family we have watched tonight, the small maker at the gable end, the wife who judged the cut by her own trained nose, belonged already, though they could not know it, to a world that the coming century would quietly close. The second change was the one old Domhnall truly feared, the one whose first far-off rumour he had caught and could not name, and it was no mercy at all, for the same decades that brought the lawful still brought also the change the old man had sensed coming on the night air, the great sheep, and with them the emptying of the glens. It had begun already, away to the south, even as the family slept, and over the next 2 generations it spread north and west through the Highlands like a slow tide, glen after glen given over to the Cheviot and the Blackface, the close-knit townships that had farmed the land in common for 1,000 years cleared away to make room for the flocks, because a glen under sheep paid the landlord better than a strath under people, and the landlords by now reckoned a glen by what it paid. In some places it was done with a kind of cold legality, the tenants given notice and a date, and sent on their way. In others it was done with a brutality that has never been forgotten. The people put out of the houses their forebears had built, the roof trees pulled down, and the thatch burned behind them so they could not return. Families turned onto the road with what they could carry while the smoke of their own homes rose behind them, in scenes that the memory of the Highlands has carried, raw and bitter, down all the years since. The townships that had crowded their houses close against the loneliness were scattered to the 4 winds. The run-rig went under grass, the shieling huts fell in, and the high pastures knew the cattle no more. And the close secret self-sufficient world we have spent this night inside, The life of the common rigs and the gathered houses and the autumn stills and the winter ceilidhs, the woven fabric of it, was taken apart glen by glen, township by township, until in many a place where 100 souls had lived there was nothing left at all but the green mounds of the fallen walls and a single shepherd on the empty hill. Where did they go, the people of the cleared glens, the families like the one asleep behind us in the grey morning? Some were pushed to the bleak edges of the land, to the poor crofting townships on the rocky coasts, given a patch too small to live on, and expected to take to the fishing or the kelp, and somehow survive on the margins of the country that had once been wholly theirs. But great numbers of them left the land altogether, and the country, and went away over the sea. And this is the last and the longest thread of the story, the scattering of the Highland people across the earth. They went in their thousands, and then their tens of thousands, down to the ports and onto the emigrant ships, the crowded sailing vessels that carried them on the long hard passage to the new lands across the water, to the forests of Canada and the hills of the Carolinas, and later to the far ends of the world, townships sometimes going together, the minister and the people emigrating in one body to begin again in the wilderness. They carried little with them, but they carried what could not be left behind, the language and the songs and the stories and the tunes, the old ways of the kitchen and the byre and the still, and they planted them in the new ground, so that to this day, in the valleys of Nova Scotia, and the back country of the Carolinas, and 100 places besides, there are folk with the Highland names and the Highland blood, who keep some flicker of the old tongue and the old songs, and trace themselves back to a glen they have never seen, emptied 200 years ago, from which their forebears were driven out into the world. The making of the spirit went with them too, the knowledge of the stillborn in the heads of emigrant men to the new world, where it took root and grew into its own great traditions far from the straths that bred it, one more seed of the scattered highlands born over the sea in the memory of the dispossessed. So when I tell you that the night we have shared was one of the last full autumns of an age about to end, I am not reaching for an easy sadness, but telling you the plain shape of what came. The family by the fire could not see it, and that is a mercy, for they lived their good night in the belief that the glen was as fixed as the hills around it, and their children would run the still in their turn as they had run it, and their fathers before them, world without end. They were wrong, and the wrongness of it is the quiet grief that lies under everything we have watched, the knowledge we carry, and they do not that the close, warm, crowded life of the township, the common rigs and the shared secret and the open door was already, on this very night, numbered and short. And yet there is something in it that is not only grief for the life we have sat inside was real, and it was rich in the ways that matter most, and the people who lived it were not the poor doomed figures of a sad story, but living souls as full and as real as you or I, who worked and feared and laughed and sang and loved their children and made their fierce clear spirit in the dark and counted themselves on a good autumn night with the harvest infortunate and were right too. The glen was emptied, but the night was real. The people were scattered, but they were here, exactly here, doing exactly this, and the remembering of them, the sitting with them through one of their nights as we have sat tonight, is a way of giving them back, for an hour, the reality the years took from them, of saying that they were here and their lives had weight, and the warmth of their fire still reaches us across the long cold gap of the years. And some of it does reach us, more than you might think, for not everything of that world was lost when the glens were emptied, and the longest lived inheritance of all is the very craft we have watched being made tonight. The spirit endured. The craft that the family practiced in secret at their gable end did not die with the townships that bred it, but went up out of the dark into the lawful houses and lived on, and lives still, and the great distilleries that carry the famous names today stand, very many of them, on the very ground where the hidden stills once ran, by the same hill burns whose soft cold water the old makers prized, drawing in the same peat and the same barley and the same patient art of fire and copper, and the cut judged by a maker's skill. When the spirit is made today, in all its lawful and matured and golden glory, it is the direct descendant of the rough, clear water of life that ran from the worm in this stone shed tonight, the same process refined, the same knowledge handed down, unbroken from exactly such kitchens as this one, through the licensed houses to the present hour. The peat is still in it. The water of the hills is still in it. The deep inheritance of the women and men who made it in secret through all the hard years is still in it, carried in the craft itself, even where the names of the makers are forgotten, so that to taste the matured spirit of these glens now is to taste, at the far end of an unbroken line, the very spirit the family made tonight, the taste of the bog and the burn and the barley, the taste of the place, the taste of a way of life that the world took apart but could not quite kill, because it lived on in the one art the people carried with them wherever they were driven, the knowledge of how to turn their own grain into the water of life. The songs endured too, and the stories and the tongue here and there against all the odds, kept alive at the edges of the land and across the sea by people who would not let them go. And the memory endured, the long Highland memory that forgets nothing, that carries the names of the cleared townships and the wrongs done in them down through the generations, as faithfully as it once carried the heroic lays, so that the emptied glens are not, even now, truly empty, but are full of the remembering of those who were taken from them, and a person walking the green ruins of a township today, the grass-grown lines of the old walls, and the broken shieling huts on the high ground, walks in a place still inhabited by its own absence, still telling, to those who can read it, the story entire of the close warm life that filled it once and the cold change that swept it away. We have spent this night in one such place, brought back to being around us out of the records and the memory, the fire lit again, the family gathered again, the still running again in the dark, for the few hours of our evening together, and now, as the grey morning fills the glen and the drove dwindles away to the south, and the household turns to its day, it is time, gently, to let the scene go. So let the glen begin to soften and recede now, the way a place does when we leave it, the small stone house growing smaller as we draw back from it, the blue smoke rising straight from its rekindled fire into the still cold air of the morning, the green flat by the water where the cattle gathered, the brown rigs bare after the harvest, the great hills standing round it all, as they have stood for 10,000 years and will stand for 10,000 more, unchanged and indifferent and beautiful, holding the small warm human story of the township in their lap for the little while it lasted. Let the sounds of it fade, the lowing of the last of the cattle, the call of the drover far down the glen, the talk of the burn coming off the hill, the low voices of the family at their morning fire, all of it growing quieter and farther as we rise away from it, until the glen is only a green fold among the mountains seen from a great height, with a thread of smoke rising from it, and then not even that, only the wide still country of the Highlands lying under the growing light, and the long years between that morning and this night closing softly over all of it like water over a stone. As a peak a plugged up water comes to Satan, and as the glen sinks away beneath us, and the years close over it, let the room you are in come quietly back, the real room, the one where you are lying now with the light turned low, and let yourself feel how the warmth we borrowed from that far-off fire is still here with you, settled into you, the warmth of a house that fed itself and kept its own, and drew its people close around one hearth against the cold of the world. That is the truth worth carrying out of the night, more than the history of the spirit or the sorrow of what came after. It is the simple fact of the gathered house, the people who belonged to one another and to their place, who worked hard and feared small troubles and great ones, and laughed in the firelight all the same, who made something fierce and clear and lasting with their own hands and counted themselves rich enough on a good autumn night with the harvest in. We do not live as they lived, you and I, and we would not, most of us, last a winter if we tried. But the warmth they had is a need we still know how to feel, the comfort of a safe room and a kept fire, and the nearness of the people we love. And to spend a night inside their world is to be reminded, gently, of how little the heart truly needs to be at peace, and how much of it is here already, in the quiet and the dark and the rest that is waiting for you now. If these long evenings inside vanished lives are something that brings you a little ease at the end of your days, and you would like to find your way back to them again, you are welcome to stay a while in this quiet company, and there will be another evening like this one, waiting for you whenever you have need of it, with no hurry and nothing owed, only a fire kept lit, and a place held by it for as long as you care to come. That is all, and it is freely given, and you need think no more of it tonight. For now there is nothing left to do and nowhere left to be. The work of your own day is behind you, as the work of the harvest was behind them, all of it done, all of it laid down, and you may let it go now the way the family let the long night go, down into the warm dark, untroubled, the fire safe, the door barred, the people you love near you and breathing slow. Let your breath ease and lengthen. Let the last of the days holding loosen in your shoulders and your hands. Let the room grow soft and far around you, and the glen farther still, until there is only the quiet and the warmth and the slow settling of all of you towards sleep, the way the household settled one by one into the dark, while the burn ran on outside and the casks lay safe and the smoured fire kept its small red heart alive through the night. You are as safe as that, and as warm as that, and as held. There is nothing more the night asks of you. Let it take you down as gently as the dawn came up over the glen, slowly, softly, with all the time in the world, into a sleep as deep and as untroubled as the sleep of a house at the end of a good night's work, with the year's great labour done, and the morning a long way off, and nothing left to do but rest. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.